subscribe and click the bell icon to turn on notifications.
We've made the files the instructor uses in this tutorial available for free. Just click the link below in the video details to get these.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on designing better spreadsheets in Excel. I hope everyone is surviving okay with all the craziness that's going on right now. It's definitely a difficult time for everyone, so I hope you are all doing well wherever you are joining us from around the world today. And I guess one of the advantages of webinars like this one is that none of us need to leave our houses. So hopefully this will provide a little bit of a distraction for us for an hour or so. Now, we do run these webinars regularly, but I'm always aware that we might have some new people on the call with us today. So I'll just briefly introduce myself. So my name's Deborah Ashby, and I'm a Microsoft IT trainer specializing in the design, delivery, and facilitation of Microsoft courses and training, both online and in the classroom. And I've been using, supporting and training Excel and all of the other Microsoft products for about 25 years now. It makes me feel extremely old when I say that. And really, my only aim with these short webinars is to show you some things you didn't know and also get you thinking about Excel in a different way. So with all that in mind, let me pull up the agenda for today and show you what we're going to be covering. Now, I know the title of this webinar, Designing Better Spreadsheets, it doesn't really tell you much. It's quite a broad catch-all kind of a title. But we are going to go into a lot of different things today. Some things you may know, some things you're probably not going to be as familiar with. But the general kind of idea is to make it so that your spreadsheets are really usable for anybody that you send them to, and also so that we can cut down the amount of errors that are being produced in our spreadsheets. So I'm just going to start out by talking to you a little bit about why it's important to design your spreadsheets. I'm then just going to go through some tips that I have, some golden rules when it comes to designing or setting up spreadsheets. We're going to talk about the layout and the structure of your workbooks, and I'm going to show you how you can utilize something called summary sheets. I'm also going to do a recap on absolute referencing because that's a really important thing when it comes to cutting down on errors and the amount of things you're having to change in a spreadsheet. And we're also going to look at how we can use cell styles and formatting to make our spreadsheets really easy to understand. I'm then going to show you how you can do things like add controls into your spreadsheet using things like data validation. I'm going to show you how you can protect your worksheets and possibly protect just certain parts of worksheets, again, to control the information that's going into your spreadsheet. And then finally, I'm going to speak to you about version control. Now, quite a lot that we're covering in there, and we're going to go through all of this at a reasonable pace. Now, just to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and we will make that recording available to you after the fact. And I do have the lovely Mr. Adam Lacey on the call with me today. I don't know if he wants to say hello or if he's gone on to mute, but we have Adam with us today.
Hello, everybody. Just came off mute. Yeah, how you doing? If you're having any issues seeing or anything like that, just log on and log log off and log back on again. I noticed there's one person with a problem, I think, but I'll chat to them in the chat panel. Any questions? Just drop them into there, and I will try and answer them. And if not, we'll save them for the end for Debs.
Wonderful. Thank you, Adam. All right, so let's start out by just discussing this first point. So why it's important to design your spreadsheets. Now, I think when we're using Excel, there tends to be this tendency, and it's the tendency you find in everybody, to just open a new blank worksheet and kind of dive in and start inputting your data into cells, or maybe importing your data from an external source without too much thought as to the design and the usability of the workbook that you're creating. Because in our minds, as long as the data is there and we understand it, then that's all that matters, right? Well, not really. These days, we rarely create workbooks that are solely used by ourselves. more often than not, we share workbooks with other people, with colleagues, with external clients, and we might have multiple people in a spreadsheet updating data. So it's really, really important that you think about this when you're putting together a spreadsheet. And the reason why, I'm sure we have all had this experience where we've spent quite a bit of time putting together a spreadsheet. We might have calculations in that spreadsheet, and it might be quite complex. And when we finished it, we're really proud of the work that we've done and how everything calculates correctly. We've then sent that spreadsheet to someone else, and within 10 minutes, they've managed to mess up all of the work that you've done. Now, that might be either through that person's lack of Excel knowledge. They might not really understand what they're doing. It might be that they are confused about which parts of the spreadsheet they're supposed to be editing and which parts they're supposed to be leaving alone. Or it could just be a genuine accident. Again, it's pretty easy to be in a cell, hit the wrong button, and before you know it, you've broken a formula and a calculation is no longer working. And you then have to spend time trying to figure out what's gone wrong with that spreadsheet. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to really cut down on the amount of errors going into your spreadsheet and just make it super simple for everybody to understand what they're supposed to be doing when they open your spreadsheet. So a big part of designing better spreadsheets is to make sure that everything is organized, it's easy to understand for everyone, it has clear instructions, and it cuts down on errors by limiting the cells that others can change. Okay, so that's why it's important to design your spreadsheets and think about it when you're doing it. So what we're going to look at first, I'm just going to go through some tips for designing spreadsheets. Now, I'm going to go through each of these points. Now, in a moment, we're going to demo all of these points in Excel, so you can see exactly what I mean from each of these points. So the first thing I would say is organize your data. So have your input, your calculations, and your output all on separate tabs. So what do I mean by that? Well, your input might be your raw data, the data that you're starting with, sales data or whatever it might be, have all that on one tab. If you're doing any calculations, have that on a separate calculations tab. And then if you have any output, so maybe you've decided to create a chart based on that data or some kind of pivot table, have those on a separate sheet as well. So keep everything in separate tabs. Create a summary sheet with instructions. And again, I'm going to show you how this works. This is something that I very rarely see people do, but it's so helpful. It just sets out how the spreadsheet is to be used. And again, really helps people who are looking at a spreadsheet that they aren't used to seeing. Color code tabs that are related. This is a really simple thing, making sure that if you have lots of tabs in your workbook and some of those tabs are related, that you color them all the same color. So there is a visual representation there of, okay, these worksheets are kind of the same type. They belong to the same subject matter. Use formatting in your workbooks to clearly indicate input and calculation cells. So again, this is really just helping guide people to the areas of the worksheet that they're supposed to be editing and the areas that they're supposed to be leaving alone. Use absolute referencing to cut down on formula errors. Now, if you've, I'm always surprised by people who have never heard of absolute referencing or don't know how to use it. I will show you how to use it if you're not sure, but absolute referencing is great because it really helps you cut down on if you need to change a figure in your spreadsheet. You can change it in one place as opposed to multiple other places. So you're really, again, helping to cut down on the possible errors that might be going into that spreadsheet. Controlling inputs. Again, if you really want to direct people and you don't want them touching things they're not supposed to be touching, changing calculations, you can do things like use data validation to control what's going into your spreadsheet. And you can also protect parts of the workbook that you don't want them to change. And then finally, I would always advise this to create a versions tab where you log all of the changes that you've made to the workbook. Now, all of these things we're going to go through in a demo form so you can see exactly what I mean. So let's start out with that first one, organizing our data. So I'm just going to jump across to Excel. So just bear with me one moment. All right, hopefully everybody can see that Excel spreadsheet on the screen. I'm hoping there's no lag. Please do let me know, Adam, if anybody complains of there being a lag, and I will go a bit slower. All right, so I have numerous different tabs at the bottom of this workbook, and I'm currently clicked on this data tab. Now, the information held in this data tab, this is some raw data. This is sales data for 2 different stores in the UK. So I have month, store, town, store code, and various other pieces of information. And I have the sales in column H. Now, this is quite a long set of data. If I jump down to the bottom, and to jump down to the bottom of a data set, if you press Control down arrow, it's going to jump you to the last row. You can see it's got 21,574 rows of data. Control up arrow to jump to the top. Now, the first thing I would do, and again, this helps when it comes to designing your spreadsheets, is if you have raw data, always put it into a table. Now, I've already done that with this data, but if you're not sure how to do that, all you need to do is highlight all of your data. So click somewhere in your data, press Control A to highlight everything. And then on the home ribbon, you have a format as table drop down, and you can select any one of those styles. And essentially it will put all of your raw data into a table. And you'll know that it's in a table because then when you're clicked in it, if you look up, you'll have this Table Tools Design ribbon, which basically gives you all of the different things that you can do with this table. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, why on earth would I put it into a table? Why is that going to help me? Well, let me show you. I would always suggest as well, once you've put your data into a table, that you give your table a name. And you'll see the first group here is properties, and in table name, I've named this table sales data. Okay, so give your table a name just by typing it into here and pressing enter. So my entire table now has a name, sales data. And I have 2 other spreadsheets which use this table data in the calculations. So if I jump across to calculations, you can see here I have 3 pivot tables that I've created from this data. And I've put them on a separate calculations tab. I've also got a dashboard just here using that same sales data. And this is more of a graphical representation of those calculations that I have on this tab. So you can see on the dashboard, I have my sales by category, sales by town, sales by manager, and I have some slices running down the side, which are interactive. So if I just want to see this data for the store Computech, I can select it in the slicer and everything is going to update. So this is a dashboard. I'm not going to go too much into how you create these. If you are interested in learning all about how to create interactive dashboards like this, I do believe we have a webinar online. Adam can correct me if I'm wrong on that one, but I do believe that we have a webinar on designing interactive dashboards that you can check out on our YouTube channel.
We do, correct, yeah.
Yes, I think it's quite a nice little webinar, so definitely check that one out.
I'll try and find the link and drop it into the chat.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, so saying that, these 3 tabs are essentially connected. They're of the same type. These 2 tabs are utilizing the information on this data tab. Now, the reason why I would say put things in a table is because, again, for ease of use, and I'm going to show you what I mean. Let's jump down to the last row, control down arrow. I'm going to add another row into the bottom of this table. And for quickness, I'm just literally going to copy the information above. Now, because my information is in a table, as soon as I add a new row, it becomes part of that sales data table automatically. So I'm just going to add pretty much the same information, but I am going to make the sales data, I'm going to make this pretty extreme so it's easy to see. We're going to say 1 million in here. Now, because I've put this in a table, if I go back to my dashboard, if I want that to update, instead of going in and having to change everything individually, if you look at the sales by manager down here, all I need to do is go up to my analyze, refresh all, and you'll see that that total has now updated. So what I'm saying here is that if you need to add additional figures into the bottom, if you've got it in a table, it will expand, and then all you have to do to update any charts or tables hanging off of it is just press that refresh button. So again, by doing that, you're cutting down on the amount of mistakes going into your spreadsheet. So the takeaway here is separate your data and name your tables and your ranges. The final thing I'm going to do here is, because these three tabs are related, I'm going to color code them all so they're the same color. So I'm going to select the data tab. I'm going to hold down my control key, click on calculations and click on dashboard. I'm going to right click my mouse and I'm going to select tab color, and we're going to change them to red. So straight away I can see here, because they're all colored red, those are all related. Okay, so just think about the structure and how you're going to color code things and how you're going to organize your data. The next tip I would say would be to create something called a summary sheet. And you'll see that I have a summary sheet right at the start of this workbook. And I always tend to put my summary sheet right at the beginning. It's the first thing I want people to look at. Now, a summary sheet, if you've never seen one or used one before, is really just a set of instructions. So if I'm sharing this workbook with other people, this summary sheet tells them what I want them to do with this workbook. It doesn't leave any room for interpretation. So you could probably do this in a lot more detail than I've done here. This is just a very, very quick example. But just to show you the kinds of things you might want to put on here, I'm going through and telling them for each of the tabs what each of the tabs means or what they need to do. So you can see on the data tab, I'm saying copy and paste the figures into sales data table monthly and then refresh all the pivot tables. So someone looking at this will say, okay, I have this month's sales figures. I need to go to the data tab. I need to copy and paste the new figures into the bottom. Then I need to go to the dashboard and I need to refresh it so that those sales figures update. Okay, instruction. Calculations, it's saying perform any calculations on this tab. Dashboard, refresh it monthly. Slices can be used to filter your data. And then I also have a note in here about the versions tab saying update after any changes made to this spreadsheet. Include your initials, date, and details of the change. Now, I've only done it for 4 of my tabs, but you could go through and list out every single worksheet that you have and exactly how you want that to be used. So it gives them some guidance. What I also like to have in this initial summary sheet is I like to explain any color coding that I've used. So if I've used specific colors to highlight certain things within my spreadsheet, I like to have a little key down here. So you can see anything that's formatted like this is a heading, anything like that is a warning. Those are input cells, these are calculation cells. So this is kind of like a key for the rest of the document. So this is helpful because if somebody comes to this document and they think, okay, so anything orange is an input cell. So I'm supposed to input something into these cells. Okay, again, just helping people out. I then have some information about where to save this document. And I also have some information about versions, again, saying update the versions tab whenever a change is made. And you can go into as much detail as you like in this summary spreadsheet. Again, the idea is just to make it really simple and save you a lot of headaches. Now, you might be looking at this thinking, well, this seems like a lot of admin to be doing for every worksheet. Now, granted, it is. And you might think, I don't want to do that. Every time I create a spreadsheet that I might share, I don't want to do all of this. And you don't have to do it, but I will say that if you are sharing that, you're probably going to save yourself a lot of headaches from fixing problems, issues, answering questions, if you have this at the start of your spreadsheet. Okay, so I always think, 20 minutes of pain, and then you're saving yourself a lot of time further down the track. All right, so that's the summary sheet. Let's move on now to this VAT rate spreadsheet. because we're going to start to talk about cell styles and absolute referencing. Now, I never like to assume people know what I'm talking about when I say absolute referencing. It is probably one of the first things that you would learn in Excel once you start doing formulas, but I am always surprised how many people don't know about absolute referencing. So if you do, I apologize. The next couple of minutes might be slightly boring for you, but if you don't, let me just explain, and also in the process explain why I like to use absolute referencing in my spreadsheets. So we have a very simple data set here. We have some invoice numbers, we have some customers, we have their company, we have the invoice amount, and we need to complete the VAT and the total columns. And you can see at the top here, we have the VAT rate, which is 20%. So I need to do a calculation in here that's going to tell me what the VAT amount is. So I could say equals, I'm going to say invoice amount multiplied by, now I'm just going to type in 20%, like so. Press enter. It gives me the correct answer. Now I can drag this formula down. So by hovering over in the corner until I get that little cross, if I double click, that's going to copy that formula down. And this formula works. It's giving me the correct answer. But what I've done here is I've hard coded that number into this formula, 20%. So what if that VAT amount changes? What if next month it's 25%? I'm going to have to go in, or whoever's amending this spreadsheet is going to have to go in. They're going to have to change it within the formula. They're then going to have to copy it down. Now you might think, well, that's fine. It's not too much work. And that is true. But what if this spreadsheet is with somebody who doesn't know how to do that? What if somebody doesn't realize that you have to go in, change it in here? Maybe they don't even know how to copy formulas down quickly. Imagine if you have 200, 300 rows of data and the person you've asked to update the VAT amount doesn't realize that you can copy down, and so they spend 2 hours going into each cell individually and changing it to 25%. That's a complete waste of time for everybody. And again, it's just down to a lack of Excel knowledge. So why don't we make their lives a lot easier? Let's delete this out. Let's do this calculation again. Equals invoice amount multiplied by VAT rate. So this time we're not hard coding the number, we're using the cell reference. Now if I just leave it like that and hit enter, and then I drag this formula down by double clicking, I'm going to get some errors here. Now I have those errors because by default Excel uses relative referencing. So this first one is correct, D6 multiplied by B1, we can see what it's doing there. But because I've dragged this formula down, Excel assumes it wants to change, Excel it assumes that I want it to modify the cell references as I drag down. So if I double click on this one, you can see it's doing D7, which is fine, multiplied by B2, but B2 is a blank cell. The next one, D8, which is fine, multiplied by B3, because it's, as I'm dragging down, it's moving the cell references down. So this is where we would use absolute referencing. So let's do it again. Equals invoice amount multiplied by B1. But this time we want to tell Excel, always use cell B1, and that is absolute referencing or fixed referencing. And the quick way of fixing a reference is to press the F4 key. And you can see now it's put those dollar signs in front of the row and the column, which essentially fixes it. So now when I copy down, I get the correct answer, and every single formula is referring to cell B1. Now, the reason why I like to use that, particularly in this session for designing better spreadsheets, is that it makes it so much easier for people to update. So now if you give this spreadsheet to Sally and you ask her to update the VAT, so maybe the VAT rate has changed to 25%, she doesn't have to start messing around with any formulas where she could, maybe mess something up. All she needs to do is go to the VAT rate, change it to 25%, and it changes everywhere. So making sure you use absolute referencing really helps to cut down on the amount of errors and the amount that people are having to play around with these formulas. I can then do a very simple calculation for the total. We're doing invoice amount plus VAT amount. Enter. This one we don't need to make absolute because we're happy for it to copy down each time. And there we have our totals. I'm going to take this a stage further now. If I want to make this even clearer as to what cells can be are input cells and which cells are calculation cells, I can use something called cell styles. And you have cell styles built into Excel. So looking at my data here, the data that's going to be changed by somebody else might be the invoice number. So when a new invoice comes in, they're probably going to enter a new invoice number, new customer, company, and they'll enter in the invoice amount. So what I might want to do here is I might want to say that these, I'm going to drag this down a little bit further, are input cells. So on the home ribbon, we have a cell styles option. And this is just formatting, okay? Now, you don't necessarily have to use cell styles. I just find that they're set up, they're a little bit easier to use. So I'm going to say that these are input cells. Now, these have their own formatting, and that's quite small, so I'm just going to make that font a little bit bigger again. But it denotes them as input cells. I'm going to say that the VAT rate is also an input cell because that could change. So I'm going to go back to cell styles, input cell, and again, I'm just going to put that up. And I'm going to say that the VAT amount and the total, and I'm just going to drag this a bit further down as well to account for anything else that we're adding in. These are going to be calculation cells. So again, just to make them look different, I'm going to go to cell styles and I'm going to say that they're calculation cells, like so. Okay, so just with a little bit of formatting, I can see input cells versus calculation cells. And if you remember back on our summary sheet, I have that there. Input cell is in orange, calculation cell is gray with orange font. So it makes it easier for people to see, okay, I need to input into here. Okay, so think about using color coding to guide people towards where they're supposed to enter information. Now, you could take this to a completely new level. What you could do is you could actually lock the cells that you don't want them to change. So it might be that I want to completely lock these calculation cells so that people can't type in them at all. They can only type in these orange input cells. Now, when it comes to locking cells, this is something that I find really confuses people. And I do admit it is confusing, it is slightly backwards. When you're locking certain parts of worksheets, the thing you have to remember in Excel is that by default, every single cell in Excel is locked. Now you might think, how can that be? Because I can click anywhere in this spreadsheet and I can enter in information. If the cell is locked, why can I do that? Well, let me show you. If I right click on a cell and go to Format Cells and go to the Protection tab, you can see it's telling me the cell is locked. And any cell I clicked on, it would show as locked. The locking doesn't take effect until you protect the worksheet. Okay, so you need to remember that concept. Everything is locked, but you can input because you haven't protected the worksheet. So essentially what we want to do here is I want to have these as locked cells, but have these as unlocked cells. So I'm going to select the cells that I don't want to lock. So I'm going to select all of the input cells, so the orange cells. I'm also going to select, by holding down Control, this VAT rate cell. I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to Format Cells, and I'm going to say Unlock. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to protect the entire worksheet. So we're going to go up to Review, Protect Sheet. Now you don't have to put a password on. I am, in this case. It's going to ask me to enter it again. So now what you'll see is that if I try and make a change to the formulas in VAT amount or total, as soon as I start to type, it's telling me it's protected. So I can't get to those formulas. However, I can come to invoice amount and I can change it. And you'll see it's letting me change those input cells. The calculations are still updating, but the person, whoever's entering this, cannot get in to mess around with those formulas. I can also go to VAT rate, change that to 30%, and you'll see that everything will update. So this is a really nice way of directing people to where they can enter information in and protecting information that you don't want changed. So think about that again when you're designing your spreadsheets. It's really going to cut down on the amount of errors you find in your spreadsheets.
Can I dive in, Debs?
Yeah.
Just in case anyone's wondering what VAT is, I know a lot of people joining us from outside the UK. It stands for value added tax. It's sales tax, basically. So something that you put on an invoice. I'm sure you'd worked that out already, but if you hadn't, that's what VAT is in the UK. And yes, unbelievably, it is 20% on everything, which is horrible. But anyway, back to Debs.
Thank you for that, Adam. Yeah, sorry about that. I forget that we have people from all around the world and some people may not know what VAT is. So thank you for that, Adam. All right. So what I might want to do now is that now that I've made some changes to this spreadsheet, I might want to update my summary sheet. So I might want to go back to my summary sheet, go up to here, and I might want to add something in that says VAT rate. So we're referring to that spreadsheet. Change the VAT rate in cell B1 only. Okay, and just for consistency, let's just make that bold, like so. So again, I'm telling them if you need to change the VAT rate on the VAT rate, only change it in cell B1. You don't need to go into the calculations and change it. So it's just making things super clear for everybody to understand. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone so far. Let's jump across to invoices. Now this is on a similar vein. We're going to do a couple of similar things to what we've just done, but I always think it's worth going over that protection twice because, as I said, people do find that slightly confusing. But we're going to get a little bit fancier here. We're going to do some data validation. Now, let me explain what I mean by data validation. What I have here, again, is just a sample client invoices, and we need to fill out the invoice number, invoice date, client amount, VAT, and total into this spreadsheet. So I'm going to start with just an invoice number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oops, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to say invoice date. Let's just say 1st of the 1st, 2020. Now, client. Now, I might type in the name of the client. So we'll say Northwind Traders. Now, if somebody else is adding in the client name, they might come in here and they might type Northwind Traders. They might make a spelling mistake. So as far as Excel is concerned, these are two different clients. And sometimes it's very hard to notice if someone's made a tiny spelling error. And if you're doing any kind of analysis on your data, things like this can really mess up your data. So what you might want to do here to make sure that every single time a client name is put into this spreadsheet, it's the same and it's correct, is you might want to utilize a data validation list. So let me show you what I mean by that. What I like to have is if I'm inputting a list of clients, and this could be something else, it doesn't have to be clients, I will have a separate spreadsheet called clients where I keep a client list. And I'll always keep this client list updated. And if I get new clients, I will add them to the bottom of this list. So what I want to do is in this invoices spreadsheet, I want to have a little drop down which will list out all of the clients in that clients list, and I can just select from the drop down. And again, makes it really easy for anybody to do, and it ensures that you're not getting spelling errors and different things going into your spreadsheet. So I'm going to show you how to do that. We use data validation to create the list, but we're going to do something a little bit fancier. I want to make this data validation list a dynamic data validation list. So what I mean by that is that every time I get a new client and I add new clients onto the bottom here, I want the data validation list to automatically update to include the new clients. Okay, and it isn't obvious how you do this in Excel, which is why I want to show you because I think it's so useful. So let's jump across to our client list. First thing we need to do is we need to select all of our client lists, Control A, and we need to put it into a table. Remember at the beginning I said tables are useful for many reasons. So I'm going to go to Home. I'm going to go to Format as Table, and I'm just going to select, you can select any one of these. It's going to say, where is your data? And I can see it's selected my data range. My table does have headers. Okay. So my data is now in a table. Now, the second thing I need to do here, and this is what confuses people, is I need to name this range. So actually, let me just name this table first of all. So on our Table Tools Design ribbon, we have table name. I'm going to name this client list and hit enter. Now, my table only has one column. You may have other information about your clients in a table, so you may have multiple different columns. So the next thing you really need to do is you need to specify which data in your table you want to include in your data validation dropdown. So for me, it's going to be this data just here. But if you have a much larger table, it could be a column that you have over here. It could be a column just here. Okay, so whatever you want to be in your data validation list, highlight it. So just going to highlight. Now I'm not highlighting the title client list because I don't want that to appear in my data validation dropdown. Now, once I've highlighted this list, I'm going to name the range. Okay, so we've already named the table. I'm now naming this range of cells. And we name a range of cells just by clicking in this name box. So I'm going to go up to here and I'm just going to say, let's say companies, like that. Hit enter. That step is really important in order for this data validation to work. Let's jump back to invoices. And we're now going to create our data validation drop-down list. I'm going to go up to data. I'm going to go to this data tools area. And this little button just here is my data validation button. I'm going to click the drop-down, select data validation. And what we're doing is we are creating a drop-down list. So I'm going to select list for my validation criteria. It's now saying, okay, what's the source? What do you want me to include in this list? So I want to pull through that range of cells that I named. So I'm going to say equals, and then a quick little tip for pulling up any ranges that you have in your spreadsheet is to press the F3 key. So you can see I have a few different ranges in this workbook, but the top one there is companies, which is the range I want to use, like so. Click on OK. You can now see that I have a drop-down arrow just here, and it's listing out all of the companies from that list. Now, if I want to utilize this in each cell, I can drag it down for as far as I want to go, so that every cell I click in is going to have this data validation drop-down. So I could go in, select a company. I know it's going to be correct every time I input it into the cell. Now let's take a look at the dynamic part in action. So if we look at our list so far, it ends at company H. And if I jump back to our clients list, company H is the last one. What if I add a new company into the bottom here? So if I just click in cell A10 and let's add company X, hit enter. Because I put this in a table, the table automatically expands to accommodate the new company. If I go back to my invoices drop down, you'll see company X has automatically been added to the bottom of that list. Okay, so it's a really efficient, dynamic way of keeping one centralized list and having it update in your data validation. So now every time somebody enters in a company, it's going to be exactly the same every single time. You're cutting down on errors. Okay, there's lots of little things that you can do using data validation in your spreadsheets. That's just one example. Let's go through and complete some other details. So I'm going to say the amount of this invoice is 500. We need to work out the VAT again. So I'm going to say equals 500 multiplied by, we're going to use our cell reference and we're going to make it absolute, F4. Enter. We're going to do our basic total calculation, D4 plus D4 to get our total. And again, if you're going to be completing lots of invoices, you can copy these formulas down as far as you want to go. Oops, sorry, don't want to do that. I'm going to leave that as it is. I don't want to do that because it's just going to put 500 in there. Okay, so we have our first line complete. Now, again, what I might want to do is I might want to lock certain parts of this spreadsheet. So again, this is what we did previously. I'm going to show you it again because it's really important. You're going to select the cells and apply formatting so people know which cells are input cells and which cells are calculation cells. So I'm going to say that these are all input cells. So we're going to go to Home, Cell Styles, Input Cells. And these ones are calculation cells. And we're going to select calculation. Now it's worth noting in here, if you don't like the way that these look, you can create your own cell styles if you want to. Now that's an entirely different thing which we could cover in a different webinar, but you can create your own cell styles if you don't particularly like the formatting of these standard ones. All right. But again, because we have on that summary sheet a key that's saying input calculation, it makes it really easy for people to understand where they need to enter different things. I'm going to change that VAT to an input cell as well. And then again, of course, we could go through and we could lock different parts of this spreadsheet. So I want people to be able to enter into these cells, hold down Control, and I want them to be able to change the VAT rate. So I'm going to unlock these cells, format cells, take the check out of the box. And then I need to protect the worksheet. So go to Review, Protect Sheet. And there we go. So again, if I was to try and go in and modify these formulas, it's not going to work, but I can still input things into these calculation cells and I can use my data validation and whatever else I need to do. Okay, so really, really simple to do things like that. Hopefully that makes sense and you're getting an idea as to how you can really kind of shepherd people towards the areas of the spreadsheet you want them to work in and also protect the areas that you don't want them to touch. It's going to save you so many headaches going forward. Now the final, actually before we move on to the final thing, because invoices and clients are also related, I'm going to do exactly the same thing and color code these tabs. So I'm going to hold down Control, select invoices and clients, right click and change the tab color so that they're both the same. The final tab we have here is a versions tab. And again, this is a little bit admin-y, but something that's well worth doing. I would always have at the end of a spreadsheet a version tab to keep track of any changes that have been made. And again, you can kind of set this up however you want. I've just done a very basic example, but you can see here I have version numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the date, a description of the change that was made to the workbook and who made that particular change. So I might want to jump in here and just say, okay, so number 6, let's say what's today's date? So the 16th of April 20, I keep thinking it's 2019 still, 2020. And then I might want to say that I have, what have we done? Updated, oops, added a new client to clients worksheet. And then I'm going to add my name. And again, with this, you could have data validation lists. If you don't want to keep typing in the same names each time, you could set up a different tab. You could have the name of all the people in your company. You could create a data validation list so that people can just select the name from a drop down. Now it looks like I need to apply some formatting to this one just here. Not quite sure what's going on there. There we go. Okay. All right. So we're just keeping track of all of the changes that we're making. Something else you might want to have are links. So you can see here I've had little links area. I have links to, or clickable links to, all of the different worksheets. So this makes it easy to navigate around. So if I want to quickly jump to the data worksheet, I can click on the data worksheet link and it's going to take me there. Okay, so really useful for navigation, particularly if you have a large or a lot of different worksheets. Now I'll just show you very briefly how you can create links to different worksheets so you can bounce around and navigate efficiently. It's very simple. For example, if I want to create a link to clients, I'm going to go up to the insert ribbon. I'm going to go to link. And you'll see here it says text to display. So I'm going to say clients worksheet. You can say which cell you want it to jump to. Now, I don't need it to jump to any particular cell, just the worksheet. So I'm going to leave it on A1. But I want this one to jump to clients. And you can see that I'm clicked on place in this document and it's going to show me all of the tabs I have in this current document. And click on OK. And I've created a little link there. If I click it, it's going to jump me to my client's worksheet. I could go further. Let's do another one. I'm going to go up to link again. This one is going to say versions worksheet. Now we're on the versions worksheet. So just to make it a bit different, I'm going to say, when you click it, jump to cell, let's say A20 of the versions worksheet. And I'm going to add a screen tip. So in here, I'm going to add some descriptive text. So I'm going to say, make sure you update the versions worksheet when you make change. Click on OK. Click on OK again. So I have my link. If I hover over the link, you see I get that screen tip. Make sure you update the versions worksheet when you make a change. So we're adding in more instruction in different ways into this worksheet. Now, we're already on the versions worksheet, but what you should see is when I click this, you should see that it will highlight cell A20 because that's what we selected. And there we go, it does. All right, so links are a great way to navigate around your spreadsheets. Now, versions and summary, because they're kind of instructional, I'm going to link these two together as well. So I'm going to select both of them and I'm going to change the tab color for these and I'm going to make them yellow, as those are my kind of instructional tabs. VAT rate is more of a random one on its own, so I'm just going to give that the color green. Okay, so using color coding, again, you could tell people on your summary worksheet what you've done, that all the tabs that are the same color are related so that people understand what they're looking at. All right, so hopefully that gives you an idea of some new things that you can do to start designing your spreadsheets in a better way. The final thing I'm going to show you before we finish up with some questions is if we jump to the, where are we, calculations tab just here, you'll notice that I have a button. And if I click this button, it says jump to dashboard. It's going to jump me to that dashboard worksheet. And again, this is just a link. Now, you might want to add these into your spreadsheet to make it really simple for other people entering things onto this spreadsheet. So let me show you an example. In this invoices, if Sally down the corridor is entering in her invoices and she gets to this clients drop down and she's looking through and she thinks, oh, my client that I need isn't listed here. What do I do? She might not know what she needs to do. So what you could do is put a nice button on here that says add new client. So she might think, oh, okay, if I click this button, it's going to help me. So let's put a button on. And for this, all we need to do is, I'm thinking, why is everything grayed out? It's because I protected the worksheet earlier. So I'm going to unprotect the sheet like so. There we go. I'm going to draw my button. Insert, it's just a shape. I'm going to choose rounded rectangle, and I'm just going to draw out this little button like so. I'm going to right click and I'm going to say edit text, and I'm going to add the text, add new client. I'm just going to do some formatting to make this look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to want to center that text both vertically and horizontally. And I might want to make this a little bit bigger so it's a bit more obvious. Maybe make it bold. Okay, so there we have a little button. So what I might want to do is link this to the client's worksheet. So it's exactly the same as what we did before. It's just a hyperlink. I'm going to select the button. I'm going to right click this time. And you can see I have a link option just here. Takes us to that same box. So I'm going to make sure I have place in this document selected. I'm going to say clients is the worksheet we want to link to. I'm going to say OK. All right. So now if Sally's working in this spreadsheet and she thinks, oh, my client isn't there, she's going to look across. She's going to see add new client. She can click this button. It's going to jump her to here. And she's going to think, oh, OK, I need to go in here and add my new client onto the bottom, like so. Because we've got that data validation working, it becomes part of the table. She can jump back to invoices and her new client is automatically updated in the list. Okay, adding all of these things just makes it so much easier for everybody using your spreadsheet. And once you know a few little tips and tricks here and there, it makes your life a lot easier further down the track. All right, that is pretty much everything that I wanted to show you. I just want to finish off by just recapping those takeaways from this session. So the takeaways: separate your data, input, calculations, output, all on different tabs, and color code tabs of similar type or tabs that are related. Name your tables and your ranges. You've seen how that can really help you when it comes to updating. Create a summary sheet at the beginning with detailed instructions on how to use your spreadsheet, what's an input cell, what's not, what the colors mean, how each tab is supposed to be used. Make it easy for people. Use formatting to denote input versus calculation cells. Remember, you can use those inbuilt cell styles, or you can create your own color coding. Protect the cells you don't want to be changed. So if you have loads of formulas and you don't want people touching them, protect those cells. Use things like data validation to control the data going into the spreadsheet. It will cut down on spelling errors and it will make any analysis you do a lot easier. Add version control to keep track of changes so you can understand the different stages that the worksheet has gone through, and you can see who has made what change in case you need to ask them about it. Use buttons and hyperlinks for easy navigation. Make it easy for people. Add a button that says add new client. Add a button that says jump to this spreadsheet if they need to go there. Okay? Think about your spreadsheets in this way. As I said, I know it seems like it's a lot of admin, but it's really going to save yourself so much hassle further down the track, even for yourself. Some spreadsheets I've created, maybe I don't use them for another 6 months. And then when I come back to them, if I've put no instruction in there whatsoever, I might look at that spreadsheet and think, I don't even know what I was doing. I can't remember from 6 months ago. So for myself, I like to make sure that I have everything in there so I can pick up that spreadsheet and use it straight away. A big hello and welcome. This is our first webinar of 2023. We did take a little bit of a break in December just to enjoy the holidays. So a belated Happy New Year to everyone. I hope you had an amazing time. We are back now and we have so many cool webinars lined up for you guys this year. And we're starting out with a really good one, Top 20 Excel Efficiency Hacks to Improve Productivity. Now, before we dive into what we're going to cover today, I'll just quickly introduce myself to those of you who might be new to our webinars. I know we always get a lot of regulars, but occasionally we do get the odd new person. So my name is Deborah Ashby, and I'm a Microsoft IT trainer. I've been a trainer for about 16 years now, and I've worked in the wider IT industry for about 27 years. So I've pretty much seen Excel evolve from a fairly basic application in the 1990s to the very complex product that it is today. And as most of you know who use Excel, there's so much that we can do with it. And the idea for this webinar really came from some Excel tips that I've been posting recently on TikTok of all places. And what I'm finding is that the most popular videos that I post tend to be the ones where I just show like a cool little keyboard shortcut or something that really helps us just work more efficiently in Excel. So it's not really those big hitting topics. It's not really things like VLOOKUP or if statements or pivot tables or anything like that. It's those little things that make our lives easier. So I thought it would be quite a nice idea just to combine some of my favorite efficiency hacks into a webinar so that you can start maximizing your productivity and saving yourself some time. Now, as I mentioned, just a tiny little bit of housekeeping. The chat panel is open for you all to post comments, talk to each other throughout the session. Unfortunately, because I'm managing this webinar on my own, I can't actually see the chat panel when I'm sharing my screen. So if you're asking me questions, I can't actually see them when we're in the session. So what I always say is if you do have a question, just note it down because I do leave some time at the end where you can ask all your questions and we can run through anything that you want to run through. So just be aware of that. I can't actually see what you're typing. And the other thing is this session is being recorded. That's always the most popular question I get. Is it being recorded? Yes, it is. You will receive a link to the recording of this webinar. I think it goes out. I think they send it out in the newsletter, which I think most of you are subscribed to. If you've signed up, whatever email address you've used to sign up, you'll get a link sent to that email address. I'm not exactly sure when that is, whether it's the next few days. I'm not sure, but you will get a copy of this recording. So with all that said, let's take a look at today's agenda. So we're going to go through quite a lot of different tips. Now, there's no real logic to this session. It's not like we're starting with a topic like pivot tables and working our way through it. These are just random tips, which are a little bit all over the place. So we're kind of be jumping around everywhere with this. Some of these tips you might already know. I'm hoping that there's enough in here that you will find at least something, or maybe even a few things that you didn't know before that's going to be really useful to you. So we're going to start out with some basic work with columns and rows. So doing things like quickly resizing columns and rows, quickly inserting multiple columns and rows, things like that. We're going to talk a lot about fill series and flash fill. Flash fill is what I like to call the superhero of Excel. It is such a good thing. And if you've never used it before, then this is going to be a complete game changer for you. It's probably my favorite efficiency tip. So we're going to take a look at flash fill. I'm also going to show you some things that you can do with fill series. We're going to take a look at Alt keyboard shortcuts. If you're not sure what those are, you'll see when we get to them. I'm going to show you some tricks when it comes to quickly summing things, particularly when you're summing totals across different worksheets. And we're going to talk about the brilliance of Excel tables. Again, another one of my favorite things in Excel. I'm going to show you a couple of things when it comes to customizing your quick access toolbar to make your commands really easy to find. And we're going to do a cool little trick. I've included this because I posted it, as I said, again on TikTok the other day, and this video was so popular. So I figured that people quite like this little hack. So I'm going to show you how you can basically use Excel to create folders and subfolders in File Explorer. It's a really cool little trick. So I'm looking forward to showing you that one. As I said, inserting multiple columns and rows. I'm going to show you the quick analysis tool in Excel if you want to create very quickly things like charts and tables, things like that. I'm going to show you a little trick for inserting blank rows between list items if you ever need to do that. And we're going to take a look at a few little data cleaning things as well. So I'm going to show you how you can very efficiently remove blank rows from a data set, how you can do things like fill blank cells, and also change the case quickly and remove leading and trailing spaces. We'll take a look at how we can quickly remove line breaks and non-printing characters from a data set, and also how we can create in-cell charts. I'm going to show you how you can analyze trends with spark lines. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a little hack with the status bar, and we're also going to finish up by talking about merging cells, because merging cells is something that you should never do in Excel, and I'm going to show you why, and I'm going to show you an alternative. So these are all of the things which I plan to show you. As I said, there's quite a lot in here. We are going to be jumping around a little bit all over the place. So let's start out. I'm just going to open up the same file that I just sent you guys. So let's open this up. All right, so we're going to start on this first worksheet. We've got a lot of worksheets in this session, so make sure that you're on the auto fit worksheet. Now, this might be a tip that you're already familiar with, but there are so many people who I come across who don't know that this exists. And what I see is if you have a data set like this, notice that this data set is a little bit of a mess. We have all of our rows are kind of bunched up. Some of them are kind of cutting off. And we also have our columns. So you can see here in these columns F, G, and H, I have these little hash symbols. It basically means the column's not wide enough for the data that I have in it. Now, what I see people doing, and this is very tedious, particularly if you have a large data set, is to resize all of these columns. They kind of grab the column and they drag it out, and they grab the next one and they drag it out. And if you've got a lot of columns, this can take a little bit of time, so there is a much easier way to do this. Now, if you have both columns and rows that you need to resize, all you need to do is select everything on the worksheet. And you can do that in a couple of ways. You can press Control A, or you can click in this little square in the corner where in between A and 1. If I click that, that's going to select everything in the worksheet as well. And then all you need to do to automatically resize all of the columns is simply hover your mouse over any of the dividers in between each column. So you can see my mouse has changed, or my cursor has changed to that little double-headed arrow. If I double click, it's going to automatically adjust all of those column widths to the widest item in that column. We can do exactly the same for rows. So if we hover our mouse over any of these row boundaries and double click the mouse, it's going to resize those rows. So much quicker than individually adjusting them. Now, just to note, that little trick there, that little double click trick is basically just doing an auto fit. So another way that you could do this is if you have everything selected on the home ribbon, if you go into the format drop down, you could choose auto fit row height and auto fit column width. That will do exactly the same, but I generally tend to find that the double clicking is quicker. Okay, so that is the first little trick. You may or may not have known that. Let's move across to one of my favorite things, as I mentioned, flash fill. Now, if you haven't used Flash Fill, and I will say this isn't available in all versions of Excel. I think they introduced Flash Fill in Excel 2013. So if you have anything after that, then you should have Flash Fill. Now, why is Flash Fill so brilliant? Well, it takes all of the stress out of breaking up data across multiple columns. So let's take a look at the first example here. I have in column A just some full addresses, and you can see we have the street number, the street name, the state, and the zip code. And maybe my manager has asked me to break this full address up, because if we're going to analyze this data, having all of this data in one cell isn't so great if we want to analyze. So it's much better if we have each item in its own column. Now, if I have a very long list, I only have a short list here, but maybe I've got 20,000 rows of addresses, and I need to break each one up. To do this manually would take me forever. But fortunately, we have Flash Fill, which can help us do this. Now, the way that Flash Fill works is it recognizes patterns of data. So you basically need to tell Flash Fill what the pattern is, and then it can work out the rest. So you can see in the first row here, I've broken up this first address. So we have the street number, we have the street name, the state, and the zip code. So I've provided Excel with the first example, and then check out how quick this is. All we need to do is click in the first one, the street number, and press the keyboard shortcut Control E, and it's going to extract all of those street numbers. Move to the next one, Control E, move to the state, Control E, move to the zip code, Control E, and we are done. We can then use our little trick that we just learned. We can double click to make everything the correct width. How much quicker is that than having to mess around with text functions, left, right, things like that to extract text out of a cell? So Flash Fill, amazing for doing anything like that. We can also do it for if we want to do things like change case or just split up first names and last names. So if I wanted to maybe change the case of all of these, I could simply, again, just type in how I want it to look. So again, I'm providing Excel with the pattern. So maybe I want these to be in uppercase, and then I can simply either Control E, or alternatively, if you prefer to use Flash Fill from the ribbons, we can jump up to the Data tab, and you'll find the Flash Fill button in the Data Tools group. It's this one just here. And you can click just to Flash Fill both of those down. So amazing at doing anything like that. Now, another way that you can use this is if maybe my boss says to me, okay, we have all of our employee names just here in column K, I want you to output their email addresses into here. So maybe everybody works for the same company and they have the same email format. So all I would need to do is, let's say that the email format is willard.scott@company.com. Let's just say that is the format. I can then use Flash Fill and it will do exactly the same for the rest of these names. Now I could use Control E, I could click on the button on the ribbon, but there is a third way that we can invoke Flash Fill. And that is we can simply go to the cell underneath and we can start to type the next one. And notice what happens. It goes sit down, and if this is what we want, we simply need to press Enter. If we decide we don't want to copy this down, we can press Escape. So if I press Enter, it now completely fills down all of those email addresses. So Flash Fill, one of my favorite things in Excel, and you can use it in so many more situations than I've shown you here. If you want to split up data, change the case. If you want to add things into data, you can use Flash Fill. Just provide the pattern, Control E, and you're done. Such an amazing little utility. Now, while we're on this page, another thing that I want to show you, actually, let's go to the AutoFit page just here. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Alt keyboard shortcuts. Now, most people, when we think about working efficiently in Excel, we think a lot about using shortcuts instead of using our mouse to move around the screen. And what you'll find, particularly if you watch a lot of Excel videos on platforms like TikTok, you'll find a lot of the Excel trainers on there basically move around Excel using entirely Alt keyboard shortcuts. Now, what do I mean by Alt keyboard shortcuts? Well, if you press the Alt key on your keyboard, notice what happens to my ribbons. Can you see that I now have those little key tips appearing underneath the ribbons and on various different commands? So we can now use these letters to move to the different ribbons and select things. So it means that we don't have to use our mouse at all, really. We can work predominantly with the keyboard. So for example, this data that I have on this worksheet is in a table. It's in an Excel table. Now, what about if I wanted to take this data out of this table? Well, I could use keyboard shortcuts in order to do that. So I want to go to the table design ribbon. So notice that underneath table design at the top, we have JT underneath it. So if I press JT, it's going to jump me to that table design ribbon and give me a whole new set of shortcuts that I can use. So now all I need to do is find the option that says convert to range. I can see it in the tools group just there. And if I press G, it's going to convert the table to a range. I can then hit enter to press yes, and I haven't had to touch my mouse once. So a lot of people really love these Alt keyboard shortcuts just to move between and select different options. If you have all these shortcuts up on the ribbon and you want to come out of this mode, just press escape and it will take you back to how it was. Okay, so don't forget about those little Alt keyboard shortcuts. They can be super useful. Let's move across to the auto sum worksheet. Now, again, this is a little tip that you might know, you might not. But I see people doing this. Some people sort of do this half right. Other people don't know about this at all. So this is a keyboard shortcut to just very quickly sum things on a worksheet. Now, it might be that you know what this keyboard shortcut is, but do you know that you can use it just to sum multiple items from multiple tables? So I've got 4 different sales tables on here for sales team 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I need to basically fill in the totals for each of these. So instead of doing these all individually, what I can do is I can select the first table, and I want to include that blank total column, hold down Control, select the second table, keep Control held down as I'm making these selections, and then I can just use the auto sum keyboard shortcut, which is Alt equals, and it's going to magically put those totals in for all of my selections. So you're not just limited to using it once, you can make your selection Alt equals and it will do them all in one go. Now this also works if you have your data split across different spreadsheets. So at the bottom here, I've got 4 spreadsheets and they're all colored in yellow: sales team 1, sales team 2, sales team 3, and sales team 4. And what I have on each of these, I've just separated out this data. So we have sales team 1 here, sales team 2, 3, and 4. So if I wanted to sum all of these across the different spreadsheets, all I need to do is select the spreadsheets first of all. So I'm clicked on sales team 1. If I hold down Shift and click sales team 4, it's going to select all of the worksheets in between. And then all I need to do is do it for one of these. So I can select and press Alt equals, and it's going to complete those totals across all of the different worksheets. So the key there is just to simply select the worksheets first, then do the Alt equals, and it will apply to everything. Now, just a side note, that works for formatting as well. So if you have the same data on different worksheets, maybe, or similar data, it's maybe displaying different values, but the same kind of structure like I have here, you could do that. If you wanted to apply the same formatting across all of them, you could select all the worksheets, you could change the formatting, and it will change across all of them. So a really useful little trick to know. Let's move on to talking about one of my favorite subjects, and that is Excel tables. So I'm working on the tables worksheet right now. Now, Excel tables, why are they one of my most favorite things? Well, they are so useful, particularly if you like everything in your worksheets to be dynamic. Now, what do I mean by that? When we talk about making things dynamic in Excel, it means that they're easy to update. We don't have to do a lot of fiddling around. We just need to add in our new data, and then whatever's hanging off of it, maybe a chart or something else, will automatically update. And tables are one of the best ways that you can make your data dynamic. Now, currently, I have this little data set here. Let's just say there's some sales agents, and these are their sales totals for Q1 to Q4. Now, currently, my data isn't in a table. So I'm going to show you an example of what happens when you don't put your data in a table, and then we'll take a look at the benefits of tables. So maybe I have this small data set and I want to create a little chart to represent these values. So I'm going to click in my data set. Let's jump up to the Insert tab. And in the Charts group, I'm just going to enter a basic 2D column chart to represent this data. Now that's all well and good. I can see my agents running across the bottom. I can see the totals. We're looking good so far. But what about if we have another sales agent to add to the bottom of this list? So I'm going to use myself as an example. Let's add me to the bottom. And I've got my sales figures in here. Let's say I've done really well. But check out what's happening. The chart isn't updating, even though I've added a new piece of data. And we can see that if we click on the chart, notice that the range that the chart is using is actually highlighted in my data set. So you can see that it's not including anything that I'm going to add onto the bottom. So if I was adding agents in here, what I could do is I could drag the bottom of this down and it then includes it. But what about if I don't want to do that? Or maybe I don't realize that that's what I have to do. Well, a better way of doing this would be to put your data into a chart instead. So I'm just going to delete that out, and I'm going to put this data set into a table. Now, a quick way of creating a table, and I would recommend that any data that you have, I would recommend that you put it in a table, particularly if you're going to analyze it. So a quick shortcut for putting data into a table is simply Control T. You can see it's picked up everything around where I'm clicked. Very important, if your table has headers, make sure you have this tick just here. Click on OK, and I get my data in a table. Now, remember, it's going to apply the default table style, the colors, for the theme that you're using. So if you don't like these, you can go to table styles and just change it to something a little less crazy. So I think I'm going to go for this turquoise color. Now, another thing I always recommend you do once you've put your data in a table is give your table a name, because by default, when you put data into an Excel table, Excel's going to give it a very generic name. So it's going to be table 1, table 2, table 3. So that makes your table quite hard to identify, particularly if you want to start using your table names in formulas and things like that. So if we take a look at the table design ribbon, we can actually see the table name in the first properties group just here. So table 1, the default name. So I'm going to give this, let's just call this, let's call it sales data. Now, one thing to note with your table names is that you can't have any spaces in the table name. So if you've got 2 words like I have here, you need to make them all one word, or maybe separate the words with something like an underscore. Let's press enter. So now I've named my table. Let's create our chart again and see what happens this time when we add something new. So I'm going to create the same chart, the 2D column chart, but now, as soon as I start to type the next one, notice it's already made room in the chart for the new data. And I can then add that in because charts are made to auto expand. So they will accommodate any new data that you add into the table. And this is great, not only for things like charts, it means you don't have to mess around adjusting those cell ranges, but also for formulas as well. So let me just show you what I mean by formulas. I'm going to delete out this chart. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab these names over here. Let's Control C and just put them over here. And I didn't want to bring that formatting with me, but that's fine for the example that we're doing. I'm going to just copy and paste these. So essentially we have duplicate names in this list. I just really want to show you the benefits of putting this list into a table. Now, I'm going to add a little title at the top here. Let's say agent and make it bold. Now, if I don't put this into a list and I create a formula based off of this list, so I'm going to use a unique formula. And this is one of the newer functions in Excel. It will basically output a unique list of values into your worksheet. So because these names are repeated in this agent column, if I just want a unique list of all of the sales agents, I can select the array, close the bracket, hit enter, and it's going to give me a unique list. Now, if I were to add more people onto the bottom here, because I've selected the cell range I4 to I17, it's not going to include them in my unique list. But if I put this into a table, it will include them. So it helps you with your formulas as well. So let's do Control T. Yes, my table has headers. So now if I was to do the unique function, and I can select all of the names in this list. Now notice, when we're using tables, we get the table references in the formula instead of cell references. So I have table 2, and it's telling me I'm using the agent column. Okay, now this is why it's quite important to name your tables, because I didn't name this little table just here, so we just have the generic name table 2. Now that might be fine, but sometimes it's a lot easier to identify them if you actually name them. So I'm going to close the bracket, oops, hit enter. It's going to give me the same thing, but if I add another person onto the bottom, that table is going to expand and my list is going to update. Okay, so the benefits of putting things into tables is it just makes everything more dynamic and you can update things a lot more quickly. So Excel tables, one of my biggest tips. Let's move across to talking about the quick access toolbar. Now, again, this might be something that you're already aware of. I'm always surprised how many people don't know why this exists. But if you're not familiar with the quick access toolbar, it's basically this little thing that we have just here. So just above the formula bar and underneath the ribbons, you can see I have a few icons. I have the save, I have undo, and I have redo. This is your quick access toolbar. And you can click the little drop down arrow and you can customize where you want this toolbar to be. So I like to have mine under the ribbon, but you could choose to show this above the ribbon, which kind of puts it up here out of the way in the title bar. Now, I don't have mine up there because I always forget it's there if I don't have it below the ribbon. And the purpose of this quick access toolbar is really to allow you to access commands that you use frequently quickly. So instead of hunting through ribbons looking for specific commands, you can add whatever you like to this quick access toolbar. So if I go to the Insert tab, maybe I want to add recommended charts to my quick access toolbar. I can right click and choose Add to Quick Access. And you can see this icon just here is now recommended charts. And this is going to stay here until I choose to right click and remove it from that quick access toolbar. So you can really go through and you can add whatever you like simply by right clicking and adding to the quick access toolbar. Now, another thing that you can do with this is you can click the drop down, and if we jump into more commands, this is going to jump us across to our Excel options and into the quick access toolbar area. And if you take a look over on the right hand side, you can see all of the commands that I currently have on the quick access toolbar. Now from here, I can do things like rearrange the order. So maybe I want print titles a bit further up. I can use my arrows at the side to really rearrange where I want these to be. I can just click up and down. I can also add things like separators to give that quick access toolbar a little bit more structure and organization. So on the left-hand side, this is where we can choose what commands we want to add to our quick access toolbar. So you can do it from here as well. So if I was to choose all commands, wait a few seconds, every single command available in Excel is now listed in this big long list. Remember, not every command that's available is actually on a ribbon. So if you can't find the command that you want to add, maybe 3D map, you could select it from here, click on the add button to add it to the quick access toolbar. And at the top of every single list, we have this separator item just here. So if I add 2 separators, I can then use these and move them into position to add a little bit of structure to my quick access toolbar. I can basically position them wherever I like, and then when I click on OK, if you take a look at my quick access toolbar now, you can see these faint lines there just separating different groups of commands. So maybe you want to separate out commands that are related to give that quick access toolbar a little bit more structure. So I highly recommend that you customize that QAT, as we call it, with all of the commands that you use frequently so you're not hunting through the ribbons looking for what you need. Let's move across to talking about fill series. I'm just going to take a quick swig of drink because my mouth is very dry today. Oh, that's a little bit better. A nice cup of tea in the evening. All right, let's talk about fill series, because again, this is something which I find myself doing pretty frequently. And before I knew how to do this, it was a very tedious task. So for example, if we take a look in this first little table, I've basically got some dates in here. And if I press Control down arrow to jump all the way to the bottom of this list, you can see it runs to the end of 2023. So 31st of December, 2023. Yes, I have my dates in US format for anybody from Europe or Australia who's on the call today. I always get a lot of hassle because I have my Excel set to US format. I know it's very confusing, but I think the majority of the people on the call today are from the US. So this is probably going to make sense to you. So I've got my dates here. I've extracted the day, the month, and the year. But the main point of this exercise is maybe I just want to number 1 to 365. And this might be anything that you want to number. It doesn't necessarily have to be days of the year. Anytime you want to number things in your Excel spreadsheet, there is a slow way to do this, and there is a quick way to do this. So you could go 1, 2, 3, you could do that That's going to take you forever if you want to do 365 days. Another way that you could do this is you could type in 1, 2, then you could select both of them and then use the fill handle and start dragging down. But this is still a pretty slow method if I want to go all the way down to 365. So there is a better way of doing this. All you need to do is type number 1. And then if you hold down, when we have this little fill handle just here, hold down the right mouse button, not the left. Hold down the right, drag down 1, drag up, and you get this little secret menu. What we can then do is go to Series, and we can say we want to fill down the column. I want it to step up 1 each time, and I want it to stop at 365. And when you click on OK, it's automatically going to fill in all of those numbers for you. So a really cool little trick. Once again, I know a lot of people get confused by that. You hold down the right, you drag down, you drag back up, and then it shows you that menu. Now, another way that you can do this, and this is for people who have Excel for Microsoft 365, there is a function called sequence that you can also use to number items in your list. So let me just quickly show you that. Control Shift down arrow, I'm going to delete out everything. We can use sequence to do exactly the same thing. So if we type in equals sequence, what we can do here is we can tell Excel how many rows we want. So I want 365 rows. How many columns? Well, I only want 1 column. What number do I want to start at? I want to start at number 1. And what number, or what is the step value? So I want it to go up by 1 each time. So we just need a 1 there as well. Close the bracket, hit enter, and that's going to do exactly the same thing, but we're using a formula. Okay, so a few different methods there when it comes to numbering things really quickly. Really helpful if you have to number 100,000 rows. Now, another thing that we can use fill series for, if we take a look at the second example where I have this little table, I've got 3 names at the top, Claire, Mark, and Taylor. And maybe I'm trying to put together a little table that shows when these people work. So what I want down in this column are only the working days. So I don't want it to include any day that is Saturday or Sunday, because these people don't work on those days. Well, this is where we can use fill series again. So what we can do here is we can right click the mouse, go down 1, go up 1, let go. And no, sorry, let me do that again. What I'm going to do first, so I'm just going to take this first date just here and I'm just going to copy it down like so. Now, this is going to just show consecutive dates. It's not going to exclude the weekend dates. But notice that as soon as I copy this down, right at the bottom, I get this little tag just here, some autofill options. And if I click it, I then get a choice of what I want to fill these dates with. So I don't have to fill them consecutively. I can choose to fill just the weekdays or just the months or just the years. So I'm going to say fill weekdays. It's going to adjust those and it's going to exclude any dates that fall on a Saturday or Sunday. So if you take a look just here, you can see we jump from the 6th of January to the 9th of January. So I'm going to assume that the days in between, the 7th and 8th, are the Saturday and the Sunday. So don't forget about this little autofill options at the bottom. It's really great if you need to fill dates and other things in different ways to just sequentially. So now I have that, what I might want to do here is add some little checkboxes in, so I can just add a little checkbox whenever these people are working. And again, this is another little tip that I find people don't realize is there, but can be useful in so many different scenarios. I love to have things like checklists in Excel, whether it's a to-do list that I'm creating or something along those lines. So let me show you how you can add really useful little checkboxes in here too. Now, you find checkboxes on the developer ribbon. Now, one thing you have to remember is that the developer ribbon isn't displayed by default in Excel. You have to turn it on. So if you're looking at your Excel currently and thinking, I don't have the developer ribbon, all you need to do is go to File and open up Options. And if we go to Customize Ribbon, on the right-hand side, just make sure that where we have the developer ribbon just here, you have a check in this box. If you can't see it, it's going to be just because this is deselected. So check it off, click on OK, and then you should be able to see this ribbon. So now if I want to add a little checkbox to denote when these people were working into every single one of these cells, I can simply go to the controls group and I can insert this checkbox form control. I'm just going to click and I can then position it wherever I like. And this can be a little bit tricky. Now, I don't want it to say checkbox. I want it to say nothing. So I'm just going to delete out that text. And once I have one checkbox in here, I'd probably take some time to position this more in the center, but just for time's sake, I can simply use autofill to drag it down and I can drag it across. And I've created myself a whole bunch of checkboxes and I can now say, okay, these people are working on these days. As I said, I use these checkboxes a lot for things like to-do lists. So a couple of little tricks and tips in there when it comes to filling dates and numbers down and also using form controls. Now, the next little tip is one that I only learned very recently. And I thought it was really cool. I did a little video about this. In fact, I've done 2 videos on this on TikTok. And they've been really, really popular. So I thought I would include it because this might be something that you find really useful. Now, I'm going to use Excel to create folders in File Explorer. So how might this scenario come up? Well, it might be that maybe you have a list of clients in a spreadsheet and you're doing lots of work for those clients and you want to create a folder in File Explorer that's the client's name, and you want to be able to save all of your work for individual clients into File Explorer. If you already have your clients listed out in an Excel spreadsheet, you can simply use them to create the folders automatically. So let me show you what I mean. I have a small list of clients just here. Some of these might be reasonably familiar to you. And maybe I work for these clients and I want to create a folder in File Explorer for each of these. So of course I could do this the manual way. So if we open up File Explorer and I've got a clients folder just here, I could go into File Explorer, new folder, create the next one, so on and so forth. Now that's the slow way of doing it. What I could do is I could simply add onto the front of here, MD. I'm going to drag this down. And then I'm going to copy the MD and the name of the folder, Control C, and we're going to paste them into Notepad. So I already have Notepad open just here. Control V to paste. And then all we need to do is save this into the folder where we want to create these folders. So I'm going to save these into, let's go back. Hang on one second. I'm going to save these into, I should have put this on my desktop to make it a little bit easier. The clients folder just here. So navigate to the folder where you want these folders to be created. And then you just need to make sure that you save your Notepad file with a .bat file extension. This is a little batch file that we're running. So when we click on save, all we then need to do is run that batch file and it's going to create all of those folders like magic. Okay. Now we can also use this to create subfolders as well. We can use the same method. So if I wanted to create subfolders as well, I would just need to add into here / and then whatever the subfolder's name wants to be. So I might have documents here. I might have / images, and I can have more than one. So maybe something like that. So you could create the structure. Again, you would just copy and paste into a Notepad file, save it as a .bat file extension, and then run it, and it will create all of the folders and the subfolders for you. So a really cool little tip, if you have to create lots of folders in one go, you can use Excel to help you with that. So I'm going to be interested at the end to see what you thought of that little tip when I can see the chat panel. All right. Now, another quick little tip. I'm going to jump back to this AutoFit worksheet just here for this one, because I want to show you something. Again, this is really simple, but I'm always surprised as to how many people don't realize this is how you do this. Inserting multiple columns or rows into your spreadsheet. Now, if you're somebody who, if they need to insert new columns, kind of selects one, right-click, insert, right-click, insert, that's very slow. Maybe you're somebody who uses a keyboard shortcut, so we can say Control-Shift+ to insert new columns. Both of those methods are valid. But what if I want to insert more than one column at a time? Maybe I want to insert 3 columns in one go. Well, all you need to do is select 3 columns in your data set, and then you can press Control-Shift+ and you're going to get 3 columns. So however many columns you want to insert, just make sure you select that number first of all. And it works the same with rows. So if I want to select a whole bunch of rows, instead of doing it manually and individually, I can just select them all, Control-Shift+, and I'm going to get that number of new blank rows. Okay, so again, a little tip that I find really useful that I find a lot of people don't actually know. All right, let's move across to the quick analysis worksheet. Now, the quick analysis tool is something which you may or may not have noticed when you're selecting data. For example, I've got a little bit of a little data set just here that has some company names. We have the budget for those companies, and then we have the actuals for those companies. Now, maybe I need to create a chart or some kind of table out of this data. Now, what I can do is I can select the data. Now, notice as soon as I do that, I get this little quick analysis tool at the bottom. Now, if we click this, we get a whole host of different things that we can do with this data. So I could very quickly apply some data bars. I could apply a color scale or an icon set. I could go to the charts tab and I could very quickly create a clustered column chart or a stacked bar chart, something like that. Or I could add totals. Lots of different things we can do with this quick analysis. So if I select clustered column, I very quickly have a column representing that data. So it just means I haven't had to waste time going up to insert, then selecting my chart. I can just use that quick analysis button. Also notice there is a keyboard shortcut for that button. If we hover over it, we can see it of Control-Q. That will quickly pull that up. Now, another little thing here, I'm just going to remove one of these columns. So let's get rid of the budget. I'm just going to delete that out. Because another thing that I use this all the time for is if I select my data again and click on quick analysis, in this totals area just here, this is a really quick way of just adding some average count, maybe a running total of your data, a percentage of the total, things like that. Now notice here we have sum and then we have sum over here. So what's the difference between these two? Well, notice if I hover over sum, it's going to sum downwards. So it's going to sum all of the actuals and put the total at the bottom, which in this scenario, that is what I would want. If I was to choose sum over here, it's going to sum it so that my sum results are in that right-hand column. You can see we have a little yellow bar indicating it's going to put those results to the right. So this is useful in some situations. So for example, running totals. If I wanted to create a running total, I don't want my running total to show at the bottom there. So if I scroll across, if I choose running total here, that's the one that's going to be most appropriate because it's going to give me a running total of my data and it's going to put it to the side as opposed to underneath. So again, something that I use all the time. Another one that I use fairly often is if we go back into totals and scroll across, percentage of total is another really useful one. So this is showing me that if I look at this data, company C has 65% of the total sales effectively. So a really quick way of analyzing your data sets. And this really comes into its own when you have a much larger data set than what I have here. So don't forget about that little quick analysis tool that you can access from that little icon. Moving along, let's do a quick time check. These lessons go so quickly. We've got about 15 minutes left, or 10 minutes if I allow 5 minutes for questions. We should be just about okay. Now, again, this is another little trick that I actually saw somebody else do this. And I thought, you know what, that's really handy if you ever need to do this. Now, again, I have a small data set. I have some employees. I have the department and I have their salary. Now, maybe I need to put a blank line in between each of these. Now, sometimes you might have to do something like this. Your boss might want something with a blank line in between each entry in a list. Now, how can we do that quickly without having to do it manually like I've just been doing there? Right click, insert, so on and so forth. Well, let's undo, because this is a cool little trick. What I'm going to do is, if I do want to insert a blank line in between each row of my data, I'm going to type 1 and 2. And because this is a small data set, I'm just going to select them both and drag this down. So we now have numbers here. I'm going to copy them, Control C, and I'm simply going to paste them underneath, Control V. Now what I'm going to do, and this is where the magic happens, is I'm going to make sure I'm clicked in this column. I'm going to go to Data, and we're going to click on Sort. And what we're going to do is we're going to sort on the values in column E. We're going to sort them smallest to largest. So what that's going to do, it's going to put all the ones together, all the twos together, all the threes, so on and so forth. And effectively what you get when we delete this column out is we get a blank row in between each item because of the way that we've sorted. If you wanted 2 blank rows, you would just need to copy the numbers one more time, depending on how many rows you want in between. So I thought that was a cool little hack, because I have had to do this previously and it takes ages if you've got a very large data set. So a nice little hack just there. Now, moving across, just a couple of things when it comes to cleaning up data sets, because again, this is something that so many people have to do. A lot of the time now, we're working with larger and larger data sets. You know, there's very much an emphasis on analyzing data. Everybody's analyzing data. We're putting our data into charts and pivot tables. We're creating dashboards. And none of that is any good if you start out with a data set that isn't clean. And what we mean by clean is we mean that we've removed things like blank rows, we've removed things like duplicate values, we've made sure that all of our data is consistent, so the case is consistent, we have formatting applied, all of those types of things. So I'm just going to show you a couple of little tricks when it comes to tidying up data sets that I think are really useful. Now, this data set, it's very convoluted. I've just kind of messed it up a little bit just to show you how this works. Now, the first thing I would do here is I would use our column trick. So I would select all of the columns in my data set and I would double click to widen these out so I can actually see everything in my data set. Now, if I look at this data set, I have a few issues that I want to address in here. So I can see that I have some blank rows in my data set, and blank rows are never a good thing if you want to analyze data. So we really want to try and remove those. Now, a quick way of doing this is if we select again all of our columns where our data is contained. Now we can press Control G and click on Special. Because what we can do from here is we can choose to select all blanks in our selection. So if we click on OK, it's going to find all of those blank rows. And then what we can simply do is we can go to our Home tab, now that we have them selected, and we can delete sheet rows, like so. And like magic, they're all gone. So imagine how much quicker that is if you have a data set with 100,000 rows and you've got blank rows scattered throughout. Just select all of the rows, Control G, find the blanks, and then delete them all in one go. So a really good efficiency tip. Now, another thing that I might want to do in here is I might want to check for duplicates and remove any duplicates. Now, when I say a duplicate, I mean something that is an exact duplicate. So, for example, let's take this row just here. Maybe I'm just going to copy this and I'm just going to insert it. So now I have an exact copy of this row above. So that was what I would consider to be a duplicate in this data set, because my data can have a duplicate region. We have lots of the same region in here. We have lots of the same country. But if every single column is the same, then that is a duplicate that I want to remove. Now, a quick way to remove duplicates, we can jump up to the Data tab and we have a Remove Duplicates button. So in the Data Tools group, we have Remove Duplicates just here. I'm going to make sure that every single piece of data in my columns is a duplicate, and then I'm going to click on OK. It's found my duplicate and removed it. So another quick way to get rid of any duplicate values. Now, my final little tip in here is if we take a look at column B, we have some inconsistencies going on here. So I can see that when I've imported this data set, and you will find if you do import data sets from external systems, they do come across quite messy, and you will need to employ a lot of these techniques. Now, I can see here I've got a few things going on. I've got everything in uppercase. I don't want it to be uppercase. I want it to match the rest of my data. I've got some weird spaces going on in some of these, which I want to remove. And also some of these have line breaks in them. So if we take a look here, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I've got a little line break in there. So I want to use text functions to quickly clean up this data. So what I'm going to do, and this is a really quick way of doing this, is I'm going to insert what I call a helper column, Control-Shift+ to insert a new column. Now, what we can do is combine 3 text functions and sort all of these issues out in one go. So the first thing I want to do is I want to change the case. Now, it's currently in uppercase. I want to change it to what we call proper case. I'm going to select my text and hit enter. And that's going to change it to proper. Now, if I was to copy this down, it's going to change everything to proper, but it's not going to resolve some of these other issues like this erroneous spacing that we have in there. So let's Control-Z and go back. What I can do is I can edit the formula and I can use the trim function. And we just need to close off as many as we open. And that's going to get rid of those spaces. So you can see now that looks a lot neater. Now, if you want to get rid of things like line breaks or maybe non-printing characters that have crept into your data, we can also add clean onto the front here. And again, we just want to make sure we close that off. So I'm combining 3 functions together, which will essentially perform 3 cleaning exercises on my data, and we are done. So once we have this nice and clean, I then want to get rid of this column, column B. Now, if I was to right click and just delete this out, I'm going to get some reference errors because this data is using formulas that refer to column B. So another little trick that I use all the time is paste values. If we select column C, Control-C to copy, I'm going to go to home and I'm going to choose to paste the values only. Because what that will do is it will keep what you can see, but it's going to throw away these underlying formulas, and then you can safely delete out that dirty column and you have your nice clean column. So a few little tricks there that I like to use when I'm cleaning up data. The final thing I would do here if I was going to analyze this data is Control-T, we've already seen this, and put my data into a table, and I'm pretty much ready to go. Final couple of little hacks. In-cell charts. Now, this first one is one that very few people seem to know. Now, if we have, as we have here, a list of students and we have their pass marks. Now, if I wanted to represent these pass marks in a little in-cell chart, I could use something like data bars to do that. So again, notice I've got these selected. I can use my quick analysis tool at the bottom, and maybe I choose to use data bars to represent those values. Now, the thing with data bars is that it will put them in the same cell that you have the number. I can't put them over here, for example. So if I want to have basically this over here, I can use a slightly different method. So let's Control-Z to undo. I want the pass mark in here, but I want the little in-cell chart over here. And I'm going to do this using the rept function, which you might not be aware of. And again, this is a tip that I learned very recently. Now, the text that we want is going to be the pass mark. Sorry. The text that we want to output is going to be a pipe symbol. Now, bear with me on this. There is method to my madness. Now, remember, anytime you have text, you need to put it in quote marks. The number of times I want to repeat this pipe symbol is going to be based on the pass mark in column C. Let's close the bracket and hit enter. And we get this very strange thing. If I copy this down, I'm kind of getting this bar. And for the first one, I'm going to have 50 of them. The next one, 75, so on and so forth. But check out what happens if we select all of these and change our font to Playbill. Look at that. It changes them to an in-cell chart. And the best thing about these is we can format them. We can change the color of these because they are just effectively fonts. Oops, let's change the font color. That would help. And they're also dynamic. So if I was to change this to 30, it's going to update because it's a formula. So now I have my pass mark in one column and also my chart in the next column. So the rep function, really, really useful for doing that type of thing. Another thing that I use all the time when it comes to in-cell charts is spark lines. And spark lines are amazing for representing trends in data. So if we take a look at the next table, we have a list of students, and then maybe we have tests that they took every single month of the year for last year. So these are the scores that they achieved in every test that they took each month. And I want to just have a little visual representation of the trend in this last column. Now, a quick way of doing this, we can just simply select all of the data. And then I could use my Alt keyboard shortcuts to do this if I wanted to. I could go up to Alt, let's press Alt. I can go to Insert, let's go to N. And take a look, we have a spark lines group in the middle there. Now I want to insert a line spark line, which is SL, that's the keyboard shortcut. SL, there we go. Where is my location range? Where do I want these output to? So this is my location range. Let's click on OK and check it out. I get these little trend charts based on the data in my table. If I want to format these, I can. So maybe I want to add markers. So we get these little high points or little points marking every single month. And these are a really nice way of just visually representing data. They make your data just look a lot more interesting and a lot more engaging to look at. So in-cell charts are a really nice thing to do. The final little thing that we're going to take a look at here, as we are just coming up to 7:30, a couple of little tips and tricks. This little tip is to do with the status bar. Now, the status bar is that thing that runs underneath where you have your worksheet tabs. So it's this little thing down here. Now, did you know that if you right click on your status bar, you have a whole host of stuff that you can customize? And one thing I would always recommend that you do is that you have these turned on. So you have a tick next to average, count, numerical count, minimum, maximum, and sum. Because if you have these turned on, what it means is that if you want to quickly find out what the sum, what the average is of a set of a range of cells, you don't have to actually perform the calculation. So if I just select these sales values just here, check out my status bar at the bottom. I can see what the sum is. I can see what the max is. I can see what the average is, and I haven't had to do any formulas. So it's really useful if your boss just says to you, hey, what's the sales totals for the last quarter? You can select it and you can see it down there in the status bar. If you don't have those with a tick next to them, you're not going to see anything down there. So make sure that you do have these ticked. And the very final little Excel hack that I want to show you is related to one of my biggest bugbears in Excel, and that is merging cells. So if you take a look at this data set, you can see here I have a big old merged cell. So for sales rep 2, we don't have any data. So I've just got NA in here. Now, if I wanted to maybe do a total down here, where I wanted to add up all of the sales above, if I was trying to do a calculation and then I want to select these cells, look what happens when we get to the merged cell. It doesn't let me select just that column of cells because we have a merged cell. So it makes it very difficult to do formulas. So when people merge cells, it always makes me cringe a little bit because there is a much better way to do this where you can get the same effect of a merged cell, but you can still do things like add things up because they're still effectively separate cells. So the first thing we're going to do here, let's just unmerge this cell and show you an alternative way. So in any situation where you might think about merging a cell, instead select all 3 cells. We're going to use a keyboard shortcut, Control-1. And we're going to jump across to alignment. And what we want to do in text alignment is we want to choose center across selection instead. So what that's going to do is it's going to give you the same look as if these are merged, but there's still 3 separate cells. So if I now wanted to do a sum calculation, I can simply select my data like that. Okay, so never merge cells in an Excel spreadsheet. So before we dive in, I'll just very quickly introduce myself for anybody who is new to our webinars. I know we always get a lot of regulars, but we do occasionally get some new people. So if you've not met me before, my name is Deborah Ashby and I'm a Microsoft trainer. I've been a trainer for about 16 years now, and I've worked in the wider IT industry for roughly 25, it's more like 27 years now. I need to update this slide. So I've basically been watching people work slightly awkwardly in Excel for a very, very long time. And before we begin, a little bit of housekeeping. So the chat panel is open for you to post comments, talk to each other throughout the session. Unfortunately, the chat panel disappears for me when I share my screen, so I can't actually see what you're saying during the session. So if you do have a question, I just say to people, write it down, make a note of it, and I always leave some time at the end to go through any questions that you might have. So that's kind of how we work in these webinars. If you have any issues hearing me at all, the only thing I can suggest is to check your volume and maybe log out of the webinar and log back in again. That tends to fix about 99% of issues. So moving on to today's topic, which is Excel bad habits. And as I said, I've seen many, many bad habits over the years. And some things aren't necessarily bad, they're just maybe not the most efficient way of doing something. So that's what we want to focus on when we're working in Excel. We want to be able to work quickly and as efficiently and as accurately as possible. So we're going to work through about 15 or so different tips. This session is a little bit all over the place because we're not focused on one particular subject. We're kind of flitting around all over the place. So hopefully you're going to be able to keep up. So let's take a look at today's agenda. These are some of the bad habits that I've kind of curated from my big list of bad habits. So we're going to start out by talking about custom formatting, which generally tends to be something which I find people tend to be a little bit scared of because, and I understand why, it does look a little bit intimidating, particularly if you don't know what's going on with custom formatting. So I'm going to show you how you can format large numbers correctly, and I'll show you, we'll talk through custom formatting and I'll explain to you exactly what it means. We're going to talk a little bit about hard coding values into cells and also basic things like copying worksheets the slow way. The amount of times I see people copying and moving worksheets around and I think, oh, you don't need to be doing all that hard work. There is a quicker way of doing this. We're going to talk about hiding columns and rows. Again, not the best if you want to just temporarily hide from view different columns and different rows. So I'm going to show you a different way of doing that. Copying and pasting data from the web. This is a big one because, again, so often when somebody needs to grab a piece of information from a web page, I see them going to that web page, highlighting the text they want to copy across, and then pasting it into Excel. Again, not the best way to do that. You're making a lot of hard work for yourself. So I'm going to show you a much better way of doing that. We're going to talk about some things that you can do to make your data entry a lot faster. If you just have to enter long lists of data or names, things like that, how we can do that quickly. Leaving spreadsheets susceptible to errors. So this is sort of really all about minimizing the errors that are going into our spreadsheets. So I'm going to show you a couple of different techniques related to that as well. Formatting cells. Again, I see people doing this all the time, the really slow way. So I'm going to show you a much quicker way. The next one is wasting paper. Now, this is a bit bizarre, this one, but it does let me show you one of the brand new formulas that we have in Excel. So that's really exciting because these formulas have just been released in the last couple of months. So you're going to get a chance to see one of those in this particular section. Manually creating multiple pivot tables. If you've ever had to create multiple pivot tables based off of one data set and you're doing this manually, I'm going to show you a one-click method to create multiple pivot tables in one go. The final few, combining data into one column. Again, something I see all the time. People will have a column in their spreadsheet and it will contain multiple different things. So it might have somebody's full name and their age in one column. So we see this often. combining data into one column, really not what you want to be doing in Excel, particularly if you're going to analyze that data. We want our data split across columns. So this is really us going through different methods that you can use to split up data across different columns. We're going to dive into a bit of Power Query in this section as well. We're then going to talk about not handling spreadsheet errors. So if you tend to get errors in your spreadsheets and you're not doing anything with those errors to make them more meaningful, that isn't a good thing either. So I'm going to show you a little formula that you can use to get rid of your spreadsheet errors. And we're going to end with some slow data entry again and what we can do to fix it. So this is basically a second method for slow data entry. All right, that is what we're going to cover. We've got quite a lot to get through. So let's come out of here. And it's now time to open up that spreadsheet that I sent through to you in the chat panel. So if you want to just open that up and we can get going. I'm just going to take a sip of tea. Hang on. Oh, very dry mouth today. Okay. Let's start out with custom formatting. So as I mentioned, in my experience, I find that people tend to shy away from custom format a little bit because it does look a little bit scary when you first go into it. So what exactly is custom formatting? Well, it's formatting that we can apply to numbers. You can see we've got a small table just here that shows some revenue values and also some profit values. Now, currently, the number formatting that I have applied to these, I don't really have anything much. I just have the comma separator and I've taken the decimal places down to 0. So just some really basic number formatting. And I have that applied to both of these. But what if we want to display these numbers in a slightly different way? So these numbers that I have here, they're pretty large numbers. So instead of 3.5 million, instead of 3.5 million written out in long format like this, maybe I want it to say 4M or 3M, or for these ones, maybe 700K, 800K, things like that. And you'll find that you'll see this a lot in dashboards. So if you've ever seen an Excel dashboard that someone's put together, quite often they'll have on them buttons like this. You can see I've just got this little profit button just here, which will display some key metrics across the top of the dashboard. So for this dashboard, it might be the profit as we've got here. Now, this is just a text box which is linked to a cell in this table so that it's displaying the number. So if you look in the formula bar, you can see it's linked to cell D13, which is the total of the profit. So basically, if this number changes, it's going to update in this little area over here as well. And as I said, you'll see these quite often on dashboards, but these days, and I don't know if this is just a trend or something, but I see people, instead of displaying the number in its long format like this, they'll just have 7M for 7 million or 700K, something like that. So I thought this would be quite a nice example just to go through some custom formatting and show you how you can apply that. So let's do the millions first of all. Not every number in this table is a million, so I'm just going to select the numbers that are above a million. So that's all of these. And then a little shortcut key to open up your format pane, Control-1, is going to open up your format cells pane. Now, if we go across to custom, this is what I mean by people finding this a little bit intimidating because they're confronted with all of these random symbols all over the place. So what exactly are we looking at here? Now, this is a really good example, the one that we have selected, because when you're thinking about custom formatting, you have to remember that this up here is basically split into 4 different parts, and each part is separated by a semicolon. So we have a little semicolon in there, we have one just there, and then we have the end one. So we have 4 parts. Now, this, before the first semicolon, this is how all positive numbers in your spreadsheet are going to be formatted. The second group, which is this one just here, is how negative numbers are going to be formatted in your spreadsheet. The third one is how 0 values are going to be formatted. And the final one is how text values are going to be formatted. So we have those 4 different parts. So if we scroll up to some of the less complicated ones, and we're just going to select this one here. Now, if we only have one of these in here, this is just applying for the positive numbers. If I was to select this one where we just have 2, this is going to be the formatting for positive numbers. This is going to be the formatting for negative numbers. So you don't necessarily have all 4 parts every single time. Now, we only have positive numbers, so I'm going to select this one just here. Now, if I want to format these as 4 million, or sorry, 4M, 5M, 6M, so on and so forth, I can simply adjust my formatting up here. So I'm going to click at the front here because I want to have a currency symbol. So I'm going to add the dollar symbol. And you can see just above what that currently looks like. It's not looking as I want it to look. I'm going to press comma, and you can see it changes. If I press comma again, it goes down to 1. And now, in quotes, I can simply add an M, and it's going to format it exactly as I want it to. Let's click on OK, and you can see we now get those more concise notation for those longer numbers. And you can see because it was linked, we now have it updated in our little shape over here as well. So a much shorter, neater notation. Let's do it for these numbers here, which are under 1 million. Control 1 to format the cells. We're going to go back to this here. We're going to add our currency symbol. Oops, not a pound, a dollar. And this time we only want 1. And then we're going to put K after it. And you can see the sample just above. Click on OK. And now we have that much shorter notation. Now, it's also worth noting, if we jump back into here again, once you've set up or created some custom formats, you are going to find them at the bottom of the list just here when you're working in this worksheet. So if you need to use these again, you're going to have them down here. You don't have to keep typing them every single time. They don't carry across to other worksheets, but you will still be able to use them in this particular workbook. Okay, now we could go on forever about custom formatting because there is quite a lot to it, but hopefully that demystifies it a little bit for you. All right, let's move on to the next bad habit, which is hard coding values into cells. Now, this is I think most people would probably know this, but I wanted to keep this in because it is so important. So we don't want to, where possible, hard code values into cells. So what do I mean by a hard coded value? Well, again, we have a small table here. We have a list of employees. We have revenue. And maybe all of these employees get a 20% commission. So if I want to work that out, it's going to be 20% of the revenue. I can do a very simple calculation. I can do revenue multiplied, and I could type in here 20%. Hit enter. So when I copy this down, it works. I'm getting the correct result, but I've hard coded 20% into this formula. It just means I've typed it into the formula. Now, why is that a problem? Well, in this particular spreadsheet, it's not too much of a problem because we don't have a great deal of data. So if my boss comes to me and says, hey, we've decided to give everybody 30% commission instead, can you update the spreadsheet? Well, it's not too much of a problem in this one. I can simply come in and I can change this value to 30% and recopy it down. But a lot of the time, you might have this formula linked across different worksheets. We might be using this 20% commission value in different calculations across multiple worksheets. So if we hard code the value in, it means we then have to go through every single worksheet, finding the formulas where we've used this value and manually changing it. And that leaves us open to errors. We could miss a formula really easily. So a much better way of doing it is to put the commission value into a cell and reference the cell instead. So let's delete out our commissions. Control-Shift down arrow, nice little shortcut, delete. And what I'd probably have up here is I would just type in commission and I would put the value up here instead. So now when I'm doing my formula, I'm going to do this multiplied by this cell just here. Now remember, because we're copying it down, we don't want cell C4 to move, so we need to lock it by pressing the F4 key to make it absolute. Close the bracket. Remember, if you want to stay in the same cell, Control Enter will keep you in that cell. Double click to copy down. So now, if we're referring to this cell every single time, if this changes, all of our formulas, no matter where they are in our workbook, are going to update. So it just saves us a lot of time and keeps our spreadsheets nice and error-free. So that is the next little bad habit. Now, the next thing I want to show you, a really quick one, is just copying worksheets quickly. So if I want to copy this worksheet just here, the hard coding worksheet, in general, what I see people do is they'll right click on the tab and they'll think, oh, yep, there we go, move or copy. They'll click this. And then this isn't the easiest. I always think this whenever I come into here, because we need to select where we want to copy it to. Now, I'm going to keep it in this workbook. I need to remember to select create a copy. Sometimes I forget that, and then I can choose where I want to put it. So I could put it at the end, I could put it somewhere in between here, and then click on OK. Now, that's fine, it's going to work, but for me, that is way too much clicking around. A much quicker way, if you want to copy a worksheet, is simply to hold down the Control key, click on the worksheet, and drag it to the right. Let go, and we now have another copy just here. So much quicker, you don't have to click around. Now, we don't want this. I'm going to delete this out. Come on, Excel. There we go. Perfect. Let's move across to grouping data. Now, I've put this as a bad habit, hiding rows and columns. Now, hiding rows and columns isn't necessarily bad. And I'm sure you've done it before. If you need to hide a particular column or row of data, we select the column, we can right click, and we can choose hide. So I could do that over here. So you can see here, I've got sort of a little bit of a P&L going on. I've got my revenue streams, my costs of goods sold, I've got my profit, my expenses, and my totals at the bottoms. So maybe I'm not particularly interested in seeing the detail. I just want to see the total revenue, total COGS, I should say, total profit, so on and so forth. So I could hide these rows. So I can select them, hold down Control, select the next lot, hold down Control, select the next lot, right click, I can hide, and I'm just going to see the information that I want. Now, why do I tend to think that this is bad? Well, check out the spreadsheet. If this is your spreadsheet, you might be well aware that you've hidden these rows, but these days we're always sharing spreadsheets with our colleagues, and I have to say, hidden rows and hidden columns aren't particularly obvious if you just glance at this spreadsheet. The only way that you can really tell that we have hidden rows is if you look in the row numbers over here, you can see we kind of have a double line, and then there's a big old gap between row 6 and row 11. So that would suggest to me that we have hidden rows. But that is really, really easy to miss. So a lot of the time you might be looking at a data set and not seeing everything that's on the page. So we're going to right click and we're going to unhide everything, and I'm going to show you a much more obvious way to do this, and that is by grouping. So instead of hiding, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the first little group that I want to hide effectively, and then on the data tab, all the way over in the outline group, can you see we have a group option at the top here? And there is a keyboard shortcut for this of Shift, Alt, right arrow. Now, if I click group, check out what happens. I get this little bar down the left-hand side with a little minus on it. So this means I can now minus and plus to expand or collapse. So I can do the same for the rest of these. Now, unfortunately, you can't do them all together. You can only do one group at a time. So I'm going to group these, and I'm going to group these down here as well. But this is so much easier, and it's also a lot more obvious to anyone looking at the spreadsheet that there's data here. We've got these little plus symbols at the side, and we can just simply expand them really quickly. So think about using grouping as opposed to hiding rows and columns going forward. Lovely. I'm just going to check that everyone's still with me, because after that webinar a few months ago where I was talking and nobody could hear me, I like to come back and check. So let me make sure. Can everybody hear me? I can see somebody is saying that the sound isn't good. Is it okay for everybody else? You hear me fine. Okay, perfect. Whoever that was, the issue might be at your end. Okay, sound. Perfect. Lovely. Thank you, guys. All right, let's move on to our next bad habit. So bad habit number 4, copying and pasting data from the web. Now, this is one of my personal bugbears that I see people doing. I'm going to jump onto a web page and let's go to, what did I do before? I think I did yoga positions Wikipedia, because there was a big long list on here, which would be perfect for this example. So I'm just going to go to list of asanas. And yeah, you can see we've got some lists in here, and I might decide that I want to have all of these yoga positions listed in an Excel spreadsheet. Now, what I generally see people to do is they'll come to a web page, or they'll see something on a web page that they want to bring into Excel, and they'll start trying to copy it. So this is quite difficult to do, and I'm going to try and do it just here. But I don't think I can get that title, or it's going to select everything, but I can select all of this. So this is what people tend to do. They'll grab the information that they want. I'm just going to go down to there, Control C to copy, and then they'll jump back to Excel and they'll simply Control V and paste that in. And this is kind of what we get, a bit of a mess, to be honest. So if I was using this method, I would then have to go in and I would need to do quite a bit of formatting to get this data to look more, to look tidier, to look neat, to look more readable. You can see all the formatting is coming across from the website. I could change that by just pasting the text only, but I'm still going to have a lot of work that I need to do in order to tidy this up. Now, a much better way of doing this is to import the data directly from the URL and get Power Query to put it into a table for you. Now, that all sounds a little bit complicated. Let's delete out all of that and let's do it again, but we're going to do it the better way. So let's go back to our web page. Now, if you do have a web page that contains data that you want to bring into Excel, instead of messing around trying to copy and paste it, just copy the URL of the web page. So you can see I'm clicked up in the URL bar, Control C to copy. We're going to go back to Excel. I'm just going to select any cell in here. And then from the Data tab in the Get and Transform Data group, notice we have a From Web option. So if we click this, and this can sometimes take a few seconds to load up, all we need to do here is paste our URL in. So if I do Control V and click on OK, it's going to go away and it basically looks at the web page and it grabs all of the tables of data. And you can see all of the tables it's found on that web page listed here. So it's now simply a case of just clicking through and seeing which one it is that contains the information that you want. And I think this was it. This is all of the asanas. That is correct. So now that I have this table, I have a couple of choices at the bottom. I could load it directly into the worksheet, or I could choose to do any further cleaning up within Power Query. And I would always recommend, if you are importing data from the web, that you do just have a quick check in Power Query, and because it's much easier to clean in Power Query than it is in Excel. So I'm going to clean it up. Let's click on Transform Data and see if we have any nasties or things we need to remove. Now, if you've ever used Power Query, if you've never used Power Query before, then this isn't a Power Query session. It looks like there's quite a lot to it, which there is, but this is basically a great utility for helping you clean your data. So you might be used to cleaning data in Excel using things like the trim function, removing blank rows, things like that. You can do all of that stuff in Power Query, and it is a little bit easier. So what do I need to clean up here? Well, if we take a look at the first row, I can see that the column headings are repeated in that first row. So I'm going to remove the first row of data. So let's click it. Up on the Home tab, you can see I have a reduced rows group here, and I can choose to remove the top row. It's going to ask me how many rows at the top do I want to remove. I want to remove one row, click on OK, and it's got rid of that first row, so I now don't have duplicates. What else might I want to change in here? Everything's looking pretty good. If I scroll across, I can see I've got a few nulls in some of these cells. So there's no data for these particular yoga positions. So instead of null, do I have null in any other columns? Yes, I do. I might want to replace null with NA, something like that. So I'm going to select both of these columns. And what was the other one? This one just here. I'm just holding down Control as I select these. And then again, from that Home tab, we're going to say Replace Values. Value to find is null, replace with, and I'm going to replace it with NA. And there we go. Like magic, it is done. So Power Query, I mean, there's so much more to it than what I've just shown you there, but that is just a little snippet. Once you've cleaned up your data, you can then load it back into Excel. And the brilliant thing is you can choose if you want to load this data as a table or as a pivot table. So notice in the top corner, we have a close and load button. If I click close and load to, my Excel is running a little slow today. There we go. I can choose if I want to create a table, a pivot table report, a pivot chart, if I want to create a connection. Now I'm just going to create a regular Excel table. Let's click on OK. It's going to pull all of that through and it's going to format it as a table for me. This is so much neater and tidier than copying and pasting it in and then reformatting it. So there we go. That is that is another bad habit that you can fix doing it a different way. Lovely. Let's move on to, I'm going to move across to slow data entry. Again, if you have to enter a lot of data, and I know a lot of people have jobs where they seem to be entering rows and rows of data every single day, there is a much better way that you can do this. Now, some people consider this to be a better way, other people don't. So I'm going to show you, and then I'll leave it up to you to determine if you want to use this or not. So maybe I have to enter in all of these details for, I don't know, 500 people in our company. I need to enter their name, job title, department status, extension number, and manager. So typing this in is pretty tedious. So I would have to, I type in Mike, I go to the next one. I have to press tab key every single time I want to go across, press enter, so on and so forth. If I want to delete something, I have to go up here, right click, delete, etc., etc. You get the idea. So how can we make this quicker? Well, we can make this quicker by utilizing a form. Now, forms you're not going to find on any of the ribbons in Excel. They do exist, but we need to add it to our quick access toolbar if we want to use forms. So what we're going to do is click the drop down on the quick access toolbar and go to more commands. Now this is going to jump us across to our Excel options and straight to our quick access toolbar section. Now we're looking for forms. I always like to show all commands available in Excel. And again, this takes a couple of seconds to refresh because all of these commands are listed in alphabetical order. So if we scroll down, we should be able to find forms reasonably easily. There it is just there. And I'm going to click add to add that onto my quick access toolbar, which is this little toolbar just here. There is my new forms button. So now what I can do is I can select the data that exists in the worksheet and I can click on form. And it opens up this little easy user input form. So I can scroll through my different records by clicking on Find Next. I can add new records this way as well. So I can go for, let's just say, Mike Smith. He's in sales. He is full-time. His extension number is 4523. And his manager is Olivia. There we go. And I can then carry on just clicking new to add new records. I can delete from here as well. So I don't have to mess around finding the record that I want, right clicking and deleting. And when we click on close, it's going to add all of the people into that table. So a lot of people really like to use forms if they have to do a lot of data entry because they find it a little bit quicker. As I said, I will leave that up to you to determine. All right, moving across. Now, I think I showed this one in the last webinar, but I'm going to show it again because it is so useful and something which people find themselves doing all the time. And that is removing blank rows quickly from a data set. So you can see here, I have a lot of data. This is all related to pizza sales information, which always makes me hungry whenever I look at this data set. But you can see that we have quite a few blank rows throughout our data set. And you'll find this quite often if you're importing data sets from external systems. They come across, they look a bit messy, they've got blank rows that you need to get rid of. And if you have a very large data set, deleting these manually is going to be an extremely tedious process, because I don't want to have to select this one, right-click, delete, then go to the next one, right-click, delete. I want a quicker way of doing this, and fortunately, there is one in Excel. So what we're going to do is we're going to select all of the columns, like so, and we're going to press Control G. From here, we're going to click on Special, and we just need to select blanks. And what that's going to do is it's going to find all of those blank rows in your data set. And you can see it's highlighted them for me, which means I then just need to go up to the cells group and choose Delete Sheet Rows. And they're all gone like magic. And that is so fast. So a lot quicker than doing it the manual way. As I said, I show this tip all the time, but it is very popular. All right, let's move across to talking about one of my favorite subjects in Excel, and that is data validation. Now, I've put this bad habit as not controlling data input. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you've put together a nice spreadsheet and you're really proud of your spreadsheet, the last thing you want is to send that to other people in your team or your wider colleagues and have them start entering in information that's not supposed to be there. So the more we can lock down our spreadsheets and really channel people so that they're entering in the correct information into a cell, the better. And one of the best ways to do this is to use data validation. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of different types of data validation. The first one is the one that I think is most common, the one that I see people using most, and that is list. So what we can do in each of these cells is, instead of allowing people to free type into the cells, we can create a drop-down list of values. So they can only select those values. So it means that everything is going into the spreadsheet correctly. It doesn't allow for spelling mistakes or anything like that. So I have my list of clients on the clients worksheet over here. So here they are. These are the clients that I want in my drop-down list. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to put my little clients list in a table. So Control T to put it in a table, click on OK. Now, the reason why I'm doing that is because if this list of clients grows, so if I add another one on the bottom, I want my data validation list to automatically include the new value. So let's go back to data validation. And I'm going to click in the first cell, so C6, up to data. And in the data tools group, we have data validation. So on the settings tab, we're creating a list, and then we just need to choose the source for our list. So what do we want to include? So I'm going to jump across to the clients worksheet, and I'm just going to click column A, click on OK, and now you can see I have all of those in there. Now, because of the way that we've set this up, if I was to add, let's say, IVM on the bottom just here and go back to our list, we should find that that automatically adds to the bottom. So we're not having to keep updating the data validation list. So this really controls what people can input into the cells. Now, you could go a stage further with your data validation. So if we jump back up and go back into our data validation, this is the one that we currently have set up, we can choose to have an input message or an error alert on here as well. So if I want to give users a little bit of information as to what needs to go into this cell, I could choose to have an input message on there. And if I want to have an error pop up, if they try and enter something incorrectly in the cell, I could choose error alert. So let's do this one. I'm going to give it a title. We're just going to say, stop. Please select a client from the list. Oops. Like so. Click on OK. So now, if somebody doesn't realize there's a data validation list and they click in here and they start trying to change things, as soon as they hit enter, they're going to get that message that we've set up. So it's going to say, stop, please select a client from the list. So they then need to go back and they need to choose a client. We can then copy our data validation down. So much like we do with anything else, we can just, oops, sorry. That does actually copy it down, but because I've got something selected, it's going to select it in there. So we can then just go through and select our clients just here. Okay, so nice and straightforward. So let's do another piece of data validation. I'm just going to enter in an amount just here, because we can also enter other types of data validation. For example, date due. So maybe I want to restrict input to in between two dates. So maybe let's say that these are invoices for 1 month. So I don't want them to input any date due after a month's time. So what we can do is go back into data validation, go to settings, and in the allow area, you see we have all of these other different types of data validation. I think sometimes people just use list all the time and forget about everything else in here. But I'm going to use date this time, and I can choose what I want, what the qualifier is. So I'm going to say between, and let's just say between the 1st of the 1st, 2023. And yes, I am using American date format. I think most people on this call today are from the US, so this is going to be helpful for you. For me, I'm so confused by the American date format. I have to think about it for a second. So you do the month first. So we're doing 1 first. 31st, 2023. Okay, let's put that in there. So now if I enter a date that's within that range, so let's do 1st of the 1st, 2023, everything is all fine. If I try and enter a date outside of those parameters, so again, what am I doing here? I'm going to do the 2nd of 3rd, 2023. It's not going to let me enter that in. Okay, so data validation to control your inputs is so important when it comes to minimizing errors that are going into your spreadsheet. Definitely suggest that you take a look at some of those other data validation options that you have in there as well. Lovely. Let's move across. Now, this is one that I find that most people don't realize is there. So this is really helpful if you need to copy formatting quickly across different cells or multiple cells at a time. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, she's going to show us the format painter, and you would be incorrect. Although I do use the format painter quite a bit, I'm going to show you another method. So let's say that I have this cell highlighted like that, and I want to copy this format across to different cells. Now, of course, I could use my format painter, but a much quicker way of doing this is simply to click where you want the formatting and press the F4 key. Just F4 everywhere you want to repeat that action. And that's pretty much what F4 does. It just means repeat the last action. So really quick if you need to apply formatting. Still on the subject of formatting, moving across to the next worksheet, we're going to talk about replacing formatting, because again, this is something which you might have to do, particularly part of the data cleansing process. So before you analyze your data, you might find that you have formatting in your data that you either need to remove completely or you need to replace with something else. So let's take a look at what we have here. So again, this is my pizza sales spreadsheet. And currently, highlighted in green, I have all of the pizzas that are vegetarian. And they're highlighted in green. And my boss has said to me, you know what, we're not using green anymore. We're using yellow. Can you change all of the colors in this spreadsheet? And what I've seen people do when they've been tasked with this type of thing is, again, selecting the row, going in and changing the background fill, selecting the next one. You just don't want to be doing that. We can very quickly use find and replace to replace formatting. So if we press Control H, that's going to jump us directly to the Replace tab in Find and Replace. Now, most people are used to using Find and Replace to replace text within their spreadsheet or numbers within their spreadsheet. But some people overlook this little section just here where we can replace the formatting. So for Find What, I'm basically finding all of the cells that have a green background. So what I can do here is click and I can choose Format or choose Format from Cell. Now, you might think choose format from cell is going to work. Now, it's not, and I'll tell you why. If I choose format from cell, and I think, okay, this cell's got a green background, I'm going to select that. It's not going to work because it will apply the new formatting to all of the cells that contain text, but not to the ones that have different number formatting in them. So in general, I stay away from that option, and instead I go to format and I choose the color from here. So I'm going to go to, where are we, fill, and I think it's this one just here, the green. And we want to replace it with, and once again, we're going to go to format and fill, and we're going to replace it with a light yellow. Let's click on OK. Replace all. Oh, it's actually done. It did the first one. So you can see here, the first one not working. So when I did the choose format from cell, it's still doing that one in this example. So you can see it's changed it for the ones that contain text, but those ones that have different number formatting in, like currency and dates and things like that, it's not going to change the formatting for those. So that is why I don't generally tend to use that. Let me Control Z to come back, and let's do that again. Control H. And I'm just going to clear both of these formats. And this time we're going to select the light green, click on OK, and select the light yellow, click on OK, replace all, and this time we get exactly what we're looking for. Okay, so really simple. Don't forget about those formatting options, the find and replace formatting options in that little dialog box. Lovely. Moving on. Now, this is something that I think is pretty exciting. So I'm going to show you now one of the brand new formulas that we have in Excel. And a couple of months ago, Excel released, I think, about 12 or 15 new formulas for Excel for Microsoft 365. So I need to provide the caveat here that if you're not using Excel for Microsoft 365, then you're not going to have these formulas. Even if you are a Microsoft 365 user, you might need to do an update before you get them because they are so new. I'm going to show you one of them today, and I'm going to show you an example where it can be really useful. And I've named this bad habit wasting paper when printing. So why have I done that? Well, what I have on this page here is a big long list of employees. Now, maybe I need to print this list off. So I'm going to go to File, and we're going to go to Print. And this is kind of what we get. You can see at the bottom, we've got 2 pages here, and I've got all of this white space over here. So I really am wasting paper by sending this to the printer because I really don't have too much information on each page. So how can I make this a lot better and save some paper at the same time? Well, what I could choose to do is I could choose to wrap this information around so that it goes horizontally across the page instead of vertically. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to type employee up here, and we're going to use the new wrap rows formula. So we're going to use the first 2 arguments here. Really straightforward formula. The first argument is vector. Now, that's a really fancy way of saying that the names, the array, the range, whatever you want to call it, of what you want to wrap. So I want to wrap all of these names. So I'm going to select the first one, Control Shift down arrow to select the last one. Let's scroll back up. And the second argument is just the wrap count. So this is where we specify how many columns we want to wrap these names around in. So I'm going to say I want to wrap around in 5, close the bracket, hit enter, and check it out. I now have all of those names wrapped around. So now if I want to print this, you can see that those, once I've deleted out this column, those are a lot better and they all fit on 1 page as opposed to 2. So that is just a little trick when it comes to wrapping these names around and how you can use one of those new functions. I like that one a lot. Now, the next tip, again, we're going to stay on the same worksheet to take a look at this tip because, again, this is something I see people doing all the time and it is so problematic, and that is merging cells in Excel. And if you've ever been on social media and took a look at Excel videos, you'll see that this is one of the most popular videos of why you shouldn't be merging cells in Excel. And I get why people do it. For example, I have this title up here and I want it to be in the middle of all of my data. Now, I can't simply select the cell and align to center because it's only going to align to the center of the cell that I'm clicked in. So a lot of people will select the entire, all of the columns, I should say, and then they will click the merge and center button to get the effect that they're looking for. Now, this is problematic because if you then try and make selections, so if I want to select some cells in column E, you can see that when it gets to that merge cell, it jumps out. So I can't actually select that column anymore. And if you're trying to do things, if you have merged cells in data that contains numbers that you want to add up, and you need to make that kind of selection to do your sum calculation, that's a real problem. So we want to have this effect of having the data merged and in the middle, but we want to still be able to select our columns correctly. So how can we get around that? Well, let's Control Z to go back. What we need to do instead is select all of the cells, Control 1, and on the Alignment tab, we're going to say Center Across Selection. Let's click on OK. So now we have the same effect. We have that employee title in the middle, but we don't have the problems that we were having previously. So I can now still select the columns of data because I haven't merged that cell. Okay, so merging cells, a big no-no. Make sure you align to the center instead. All right, moving along, filter pages. I've actually just done a YouTube video on this and people seem to be really liking it, so I thought I would include it in here. Because I've put this as a bad habit that it's really not a bad habit, but it's just unnecessary if you need to create multiple pivot tables. And people don't tend to know that this option exists. So we're going to create one pivot table, and then I'm going to show you how you can create multiple with one click. So we're going to be using our pizza sales data once again. And I've already got this data in a table, so we just need to create our pivot table. So let's jump up to table design. We're going to go to summarize with pivot table, and we're going to put it on a new worksheet like so. I'm going to expand out my pivot table fields. Now remember, I've got this as a little floating panel. Traditionally, you'll see it docked all the way over to the side, and you might find it looks like that on yours as opposed to floating. I personally like to have this out here so that it's closer to the pivot table that I'm building, and I don't have to move my mouse around quite as much. So let's build our pivot table. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put the order date in the rows, and I'm going to put the, let's say, the pizza name. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. I'm going to do the total price in there like so. Have I got the correct one in there? Yes, I do. Now, let's just apply some number formatting. I'm going to right click and go to number format, and we'll go to currency and take these down to 0 decimal places. And I'm going to add the pizza category to the filters area. So all of my pizzas are divided down into 4 different categories: chicken, classic, supreme, or veggie. Now, this filter area is really important. Maybe my boss has come to me and he said, okay, I want to see what the results are for each of the categories that we have listed up here. So he basically wants a pivot table that shows the sum of the total price for each one of these different categories. So because I have 4 categories, what I see people doing is creating 4 pivot tables manually. So they might copy this worksheet, they might create another pivot table, so on and so forth. Now that's really slow. What you can do is have the information up in the filter area like we have here, and then you simply need to go to options and show report filter pages. Now, when I click this, cast your eyes down to where I have all of my tabs at the bottom. I'm going to click on OK, and you can see it creates, I know I've got a lot of worksheets down here, but it's created a worksheet for each one of those categories. So we have chicken, we have classic with a pivot table, supreme with a pivot table, and veggie with a pivot table. And each one has the particular category in the filter, and it's showing the data related to that. So instead of manually creating these, I've got Excel to do all the hard work for me by using that filter by pivot table report. Okay, so another really good little tip in there. Right, so now I have 4 pivot tables related to pizza that I don't actually need. So let's move across to multiple data types. So this is a big one. Again, something that I see all the time. People trying to work with data sets that contain multiple pieces of information in one column. So again, working with our pizza sales data, you can see that in column A, I have the pizza name, but I also have the category, and they're separated by a dash. And this is so common. I don't know why people do this, but I see it all the time. Now, this is really bad if you want to then go on to analyze this data set. So maybe my intention is to take this data, maybe I want to put it into a pivot table and then create a pivot chart. If we have different types of data combined into one column, this is effectively going to be one field in our pivot table. We can't separate these out. Okay, so what we generally tend to tell people is make sure you have a column for each little piece of information. So really what I want here is a column that holds the pizza name and another column that holds the pizza category. So let's separate this out, and I'm going to show you a few different methods that you can use for breaking up data. These are good in so many different scenarios. So if you're not sure how to split up data, join data together, then you want to make sure you're paying attention to this. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create 2 new columns, or insert 2 new columns, Control, Shift, plus to insert 2. Now we're going to call this one pizza name, and this one's going to be pizza category. So let's deal with separating out the pizza name first of all. Now, the quickest way to do all of this would be to use flash fill, probably one of my favorite things in Excel. Check out how quick this is if you've never used flash fill before. All we need to do is type in the first one so that Excel knows what pattern it's looking for. So the first pizza name is the Hawaiian pizza, and the pizza category is classic. All I need to do now is Control E and then do Control E over here. Like magic. How quick is that? So flash fill is always my go-to option when I'm trying to separate up data. But it's worth bearing in mind that flash fill won't work in every single scenario. If I had a blank column separating column A and where I want to output my values, flash fill isn't going to work. And you will have that situation from time to time. So let's take a look at a couple of alternative ways that we can do this. Now, the first way is to use functions. So what I could do here is I could use some text functions like left. So we want to separate out the pizza name. Now, the left function basically allows us to extract a number of characters from the left-hand side of the cell. So everything from the left, however many number of characters we specify. So the first argument is where we're going to find the text, which is in A2. The next argument is the number of characters, and this is where we come across a problem. Because what I could do here is I could count how many characters I have in the Hawaiian pizza, and I could enter that in. Maybe it's 20, something like that. But it's not going to be 20 characters for every single pizza I have in this list, because I want to copy this formula down, and in its current state, it's going to extract 20 characters from the left in every single pizza name. And because these are all different lengths, that's not going to work. Now, we can get around this by incorporating the find function in here. So we could say find, and I could look at this and think, okay, I want to find the dash, and I want to extract everything before the dash. That's going to work. That's going to get the pizza name in every single situation. So I could say here, find text, and we're going to say space dash space within here. I'm going to close it off and close it off again, hit enter, and we're going to get the pizza name. Okay, so that is a valid way. We could do something similar using the right function to get the pizza category, but I find that people tend to not be able to remember this particular format. So what's another way we could do this? Well, again, if you are one of the lucky Microsoft 365 users, we have a whole new set of text functions which have basically been developed because people find using things like left, right, mid really complicated and hard to remember. So I could use text split. This is a brand new function, again, available in Microsoft 365. So this is really simple. We can just select the text, and then we can say where the column delimiter is or what column delimiter we want to split at. So again, I could say space dash space, close the bracket, hit enter, and it does both of the columns for me, and I can then drag it down. Okay, really straightforward. So those are a few different methods you can use. As I said, flash fill is always the go-to, but the point here is really to remember to split up your data into separate columns if you want to analyze it effectively. Last couple of little tips before we finish up. We should finish exactly on time. The next little bad habit is not handling errors in your spreadsheet. And you've probably seen this before if you've been sent a spreadsheet. Loads of NA errors or value errors or name errors all over the place, and things can look messy and confusing. So let's take a look at an example of an error. We're going to do a quick VLOOKUP. Now, if you've never used VLOOKUP before, then this is going to be a quick little guide for you. But what we can use VLOOKUP for is basically to look up information in a table and return information in a different column. So maybe over here in this table, I want to look up the pizza name in this table over here, and I want it to return the pizza category and the price. So we're going to use VLOOKUP to do this. So let's type in VLOOKUP. Now we've got 4 different arguments here. The first argument is the lookup value. So what are we looking up? We're looking up the pizza name, G5, comma. Where are we looking it up? Well, we're looking it up in this table over here. So I'm going to select the entire table. Now, because I am going to copy this formula down, I don't want this table to also move down. So remember to press F4 to lock that table array. Another way you could get around that is if you put this into an Excel table, you're not going to need to lock it because it's going to use table references instead. The next argument is the column index number. So this is the column number of what we want to return. So we want to return the pizza category. Now VLOOKUP numbers columns in the table from left to right. So pizza name is column 1, pizza category, column 2, price, column 3. So if we want to return the pizza category, the column index number is 2 for this one. And then we just need to specify if we want to exactly match the pizza name in the table. Yes, we do. So we want a false on the end here or a 0, or you don't have to type anything because the default behavior is to do a false match. So now if we hit enter, looks good so far. It's telling me the chicken pesto pizza is in the category chicken, which I would assume that it is. But if I now copy this formula down, we're going to come across some issues. We have NA errors in here. Now I'm going to guess that the Fiesta pizza, the Vegan Delight, and the Nutella pizza, we haven't had any orders for those, so they're not listed in this table. Now, if I was to send this spreadsheet to my colleague and they look at this, they might not really know what this NA means. So what does that mean? We could make this more meaningful to them by adding in some error handling. And I would suggest you do this for any errors that you have in your spreadsheet. Now, the 2 main functions that we have for handling errors in Excel are if error and if NA. So I'll just type them out here so you can see what they look like. So if error and if NA. Now, if NA will deal with NA errors only. So in this instance, I could use that. If error will deal with any error that you have. So if you don't have an NA error, you have something else. If error is the one that you want to use. If you've got NAs, you can use if NA or if error. Okay, that is the difference between those 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit my VLOOKUP formula up in the formula bar. And I'm going to add in some error handling to make this more meaningful so people know exactly what that NA means. So we're going to add FNA on the beginning. The value is going to be generated by our VLOOKUP function. we now need to specify the value if it finds NA in the cell. So I'm going to say in quote marks, no orders, like so, and hit enter. And then when we copy this down, we now have a much more useful piece of information in that cell as opposed to NA. And it just helps people, because sometimes people think that maybe there's an error, or maybe they've done something wrong if there is an error in a cell. So we want to make it as explanatory as possible. I could go and do a similar thing for the price column over here. We're running out of time, so I'm going to leave that. But another little thing you could do if you just wanted to highlight all of the pizzas that haven't had any orders, again, you could use conditional formatting to do that. You could select these cells, go to conditional formatting, highlight cell rules, and we could say text that contains, and I'm going to say no orders. And then we can change it to whatever fill we like. And that's going to highlight all of those so they really stand out. Final little tip, data types. Again, this is one of those things that was kind of sneakily added into Excel, and a lot of people don't even know that they're there or haven't even noticed. Now, you'll find data types on the data tab in the middle just here. And if you click the drop down, we have quite a few different types of data that we can choose from. So what exactly are these? Well, these are a great way of quickly getting data into a spreadsheet. And the thing I say about these to people is this is a really great way of creating your own data set. So if you want to practice your Excel skills and you're looking for data to practice on, a lot of the time trawling around the internet trying to find free data sets that you can download and use is a bit of a problem. You can quickly create your own data sets using these. So let me show you. We're going to stick on the theme of yoga. I have some yoga poses in column A. And maybe I want to complete the information for the body position, the experience level, intensity, and the spine position. So I could go off to the internet and look up boat pose and find out what the correct body position is, what the experience level is. I could find out all of this information and then kind of copy it across. But how long is that going to take me to do for each one of these? It's going to take me forever. Now, what we can do with data types is we can use these to automatically populate the data for us. And you can see we don't just have yoga, we have stock information, we have geography information, we have all different kinds of things in here. So what we're going to do is let's click on the first one and click on yoga because this is related to yoga. And you can see it's only done it for the first one. I should have really selected all of them. But notice what happens here. I've got this little icon next to boat pose, and I have this little plus at the side. And this now allows me to select any of these pieces of data to fill into a column. So if I choose body position, oops, that wasn't meant to happen. Just bear with me. Hang on 1 second. I'm going to select all of these. Okay. Things never work in the session how they work when you're practicing. Oh, it's going to hang on me now, isn't it? There we go. That's better. All right. So you can see if you select all of them, you then get one next to each of them. So what you should be able to do here is you should be able to click this, choose from one of these, and it's going to output them. I don't know why it's outputting them over here. Normally it outputs them into the next column. For some reason, mine's outputting it over here. It might be because I have these column headings already in here. So yeah, but it's going to show you that information, body position. I can then click again and I can choose whatever I want. So intensity level, it's going to output it. Experience level, it's going to output it. And I could carry on going, selecting all of these different types of things. So a really great way of building out data sets. I use this quite a bit. I use the geography one quite a lot. So if you have a list of countries or states or things like that, and you want to find out very quickly what the population is, what the demographics are, all of that kind of stuff, you can use these data types for. Final point to mention about these is you might find that when you go into yours, you don't have as many as I have here. I know for sure that I definitely only had about 4 of them up until a few months ago. So I think these are sort of rolled out periodically. So I would definitely check and see which ones you have, but they can be super useful for just creating data sets as well. Hello everyone and welcome to this month's webinar on Excel charts formatting, hacks, tips, tricks, all of that good stuff. So for anybody who is new to our webinars, I'll just briefly introduce myself. So my name's Deborah Ashby. I'm a Microsoft instructor and subject matter expert, and I've been using and training Microsoft products for just over 20 years now, and I'm going to be your host for today. Now, before we get into the lesson, just a little bit of housekeeping. I always like to answer some questions which are asked every single session. So the chat panel is open for everyone. So if you want to chat and post comments throughout the webinar, then please feel free. Just bear in mind that if you have any questions, whilst I'm sharing my screen, I can't actually see the chat panel. So what I generally do is I leave some time at the end. If you have a question as we're going through, just jot it down and we can just go through it at the end of the session. So I'll leave about 5 minutes or so at the end. Also, another question I get all the time is this webinar being recorded? Yes, it is. I've remembered to click the record button today. So you can rewatch this in your own time at a later date, and you can use the practice file that I've just sent through to you. You should receive a link to this webinar once it's been uploaded to the Simon Sez IT website, and I think it's sent out in the monthly newsletter. So you'll get a link to it. It's also available on the Simon Sez IT website. You've got the file. I think that's all we need to do. We can pretty much dive in to what we're going to be covering today. Now, briefly, just a little bit of a charts overview. We're really going to focus on just charts and charting skills today. And really, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks when it comes to creating engaging visualizations of data. And hopefully, I'm going to show you some useful things that you didn't know previously. Because charts really are an important part of Excel, particularly these days as analyzing and visualizing data becomes a more and more sought after skill. Everybody's creating dashboards, charts, visualizations. It's very popular at the moment. And we're going to start with a very important and often overlooked topic, which is choosing the correct chart for your data, because not all charts are created equally and not all charts are suitable for every type of data set. So before we get too far into that, let's just take a look at the other things that we're going to cover. As I said, we're going to start out with choosing the right chart. I'm going to speak very briefly about the difference between Excel charts and pivot charts in case you have any confusion with regards to those two. And then we're basically going to dive in and start creating some charts. And I'm going to show you some formatting tips and tricks that hopefully you are maybe unfamiliar with or have never used before. So we're going to start out with everybody's favorite, a clustered column chart. I'm going to show you some formatting that you can do to make it look really cool. I'm going to introduce you to something called Power Toys in Excel. This is going to help you when it comes to if you have specific colors that you want to use in your charts. I'll speak more about that when we get to it. We're going to do things like add slicers. I'm going to show you how to customize them again so they really look and feel part of your chart. We're going to talk about line charts. Again, I'm going to show you some formatting tips and tricks. We're going to take a look at how we can apply custom formatting to the chart axes and how we can basically overlay two charts together to give a completely different type of chart. We're then going to move on to a stacked column chart. And this is really cool because I'm going to show you how you can build a conditional stacked column chart that basically changes color depending on what's going on elsewhere in the spreadsheet. And also how you can add a moving target line, which updates again if values change in the spreadsheet. And then we're going to end with map charts because these can be really cool. They do have a little bit of a drawback. So we're going to talk through that and I'm going to show you some tricks when it comes to putting together a map chart as well. Also going to throw in some information about other types of chart because we have so many different chart types in Excel, but unfortunately we don't have time to cover them all today. So that is our agenda. So let's come out of here and I will load up the same spreadsheet that you guys hopefully have open. And we're going to start out on the chart types tab. So make sure that you're clicked on that because I just want to briefly talk about that point I mentioned that not all chart types are suitable for your data. And I've just got a little example here just to illustrate that. So we have a very small data set just here, and I mean very small. It's absolutely tiny. We have 4 different fruits, and we just have some prices for those fruits. And I've basically used this tiny data set and created 4 charts. And these are really 4 of the most popular charts that you see people using in their spreadsheets. So you have a pie chart, a column chart, a line chart, and a bar chart. And let's just take a moment to take a look at the different ways that these charts are displaying this data. Now, if we take a look at the 2 charts that are on the left-hand side, so for example, the pie chart and the line chart, these 2 really aren't great at displaying the data that we have. Now, pie charts, I'm not the biggest fan of pie charts. And the reason why is pretty well illustrated just here. If you have values in your data set that are reasonably close together, like I do here, there's not too much of a difference between any of these prices, it makes it quite hard to determine which is the highest price, which is the lowest price, just by looking at the pie chart. We could start adding things like data labels to make it really obvious, but it's particularly hard for me to tell which one is larger out of this yellow segment and the pink segment. They both look reasonably similar. Whereas if we have a look at the same data but displayed in a column chart on the right-hand side, we can instantly see which one of those has the highest price and which one has the lowest price. So the column chart on first glance is a lot easier to interpret than maybe the pie chart. Also, with a pie chart, if you have a lot more data points, so I only have 4 items I'm showing in here, but if I had like 20 things that I wanted to display in my chart, the pie chart segments start to get really small and your chart can get really confusing, and it's just not a great way to display larger data sets. So I'm going to explain to you a bit later on exactly what pie charts are good for, but for this type of data, not so great. The same thing with this line chart. If we take a look at this line chart is really showing me nothing. We've basically got our fruits running across the bottom. We've got the prices, and it's just showing me sort of that these prices go down depending on the fruits. Now, this isn't really telling me anything insightful at all. And that is because line charts are generally best for time-based data. So what I mean by that is if instead of item and price, I had the amount of fruit that sold between a specific period, so maybe January to December of 2022. Because I have a time element in my data, I could then use a line chart and it's going to display it a lot better. So line charts are better for time-based data that changes, okay? So again, this isn't really suitable for this type of data. Now, the other chart that we have here is the bar chart. And again, this would be suitable for this kind of data. A bar chart is basically just a flipped round version of the column chart. And you'll find that for a lot of your data sets that you're going to use, the column and the bar chart, they are good all-rounders. I always say, if in doubt, use a column or a bar chart. They do suit most types of data. Okay, so just be aware of that. The chart that you choose is really important when it comes to how effective you're communicating the message of your data. So just a few little tips and tricks there. So let's dive in and start to take a look at some examples. Now we're going to jump across to the source tab because this contains the data that we're going to be putting into a chart. Now this data set, this is data from a store, I think. I just downloaded it off of the web. I think it's store sales data. It was a very large data set. It was about 7,000 rows. I've minimize this down to just 200 rows. So if I press Control down arrow, it's going to jump me to the last row. You can see we just have 200 rows of data that we're going to use in our charts. Now, another thing that I've also already done is I've put this data into a table. Now, how do I know that my data is in a table? Well, there's a couple of ways that I can tell. The main one and the easiest way to tell is if you take a look at your ribbons running across the top, notice that we have a table design contextual ribbon. If my data wasn't in a table, I wouldn't be able to see this ribbon up here. You can also see I have these filter drop downs. Those automatically get applied when we convert our data set into an Excel table. Now, if you're not sure how to convert data to a table, you simply click in it, press Control T. I can't do it because I'm already in a table, and it's going to just ask you if your data has headers. Click on OK, and it's going to format your data as a table. Now, what is the point of doing that? Why do we put our data into an Excel table before we analyze it? Well, the reason is most data sets aren't static. Most data sets will change over time. So I'm probably going to want to add more records into the bottom of this data set. Now, if I have my data in a table, one of the good things about tables is that they auto expand and will accommodate any new data that we add into the bottom. So consequently, if I've built a chart off of this table data, it's automatically going to include anything new that I add. I just need to refresh the chart. I don't need to sort of go in and start messing around with cell references. So my first tip is always put your data set into an Excel table before you put it into a chart, because it's going to be a lot easier for you when it comes time to update it. That moves me on to my next point, the difference between Excel tables and, Excel charts, I should say, and pivot charts. Now, we can create an Excel chart off of any data set. So, for example, if I go back here, this small data set isn't in an Excel table. If I click in it, I'm not getting the table design ribbon, but I can still create a chart based off of this data set. So I can go to Insert. I have all of my chart options just here. I can open up and go to All Charts, and I can select any of these and create a chart. Whereas with a pivot chart, you need to create that based off of pivot table data. So your data needs to be in a pivot table first of all, in order for you to create a pivot chart. So you do have two slightly different chart types there, and we do use them in slightly different ways. Now, in this first example, we're going to build a clustered column chart off of pivot table data. So I'm going to take the data that I have here. It's already in a table. We're now going to create ourselves a pivot table. And we're going to put it over here on the column chart 1 tab. So because I have my data in a table, I can go up to table design, and we have a summarize with pivot table option just here. So let's click it. I'm going to put my pivot table on an existing worksheet, and that existing worksheet is column chart 1, and I'm going to put it just here in cell B3. Let's click on OK. So now I have my empty pivot table. I'm going to build a very, very simple pivot table because we don't want to start cluttering up our charts too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the market field, and I'm going to drop it down into rows. And then we're going to grab the sales field, and we're going to drop it into values. So what I'm looking at here is all of my data summarized by the market. So this is sort of like the region, and that's the total sum of sales for those particular markets. Now, before I create my pivot chart, I'm just going to do a little bit of formatting to this pivot table. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the number formatting so this looks a little bit better. So let's right click, number format, and I'm going to apply a counting format with 0 decimal places, like so. And I'm also going to remove the grand total because I don't want the grand total to be included in the chart when I create it. So let's jump up to the Design tab, go over to Grand Totals, and we're going to turn off for rows and columns. Lovely. So now my data is pretty much ready for me to create a pivot chart. So we're going to click in the data, up to Pivot Table Analyze. In the Tools group, we have Pivot Chart. So this is going to open your entire charts gallery. And this is what I mean. We have so many different chart types that we can choose from in here. And each of these chart types, each of these different categories also has numerous other variations of that particular chart. For example, in the line chart category, I could create a basic line chart, or I could create one that has markers. I can create a 3D line chart, so on and so forth. The donut chart, which is also a very popular chart that people like to use, is underneath pie. It's this one just here. It's basically a pie chart. It's just got a hole in the middle. Now, this leads me on to my first little tip here, and that is when you are creating charts of any kind, stay well away from the 3D version of anything. 3D charts are just really not great at allowing people to judge exactly what the values are represented in that chart. You can see this one, the perspective is all a bit off. It's very difficult to sort of be able to tell which segments are larger because of the perspective and the 3D element. So my advice to you, stay away from 3D charts. I'm sure there is a use for them in some industries, but in general, as a rule, stay away from them. As I mentioned before as well, with pie charts, I generally tend to like to stay away from pie charts, except if I have a very, very tiny data set. And when I say a tiny data set, I mean really comparisons between maybe 2 or 3 things. So for example, if I was analyzing a data set, maybe it was an HR data set, and I wanted to see how many male versus female people there were working at the company, I might use a pie chart for that because it's just 2 things that I'm comparing, male and female. And it's quite good for comparing 2 things together. It gives you a really good result. But anything more than that, I generally tend to stay away from pie and donut charts. Again, it's completely personal preference. That's just my feeling when it comes to pie charts. Use them with small amounts of data. Now, the chart that we're going to be creating is a column chart. And we're just going to start out with everyone's favorite, the good old clustered column chart. Let's select it, click on OK. Now, when you enter a chart, or a cluster column chart in this case, it's going to look like this. Now, it's displaying our data. It doesn't particularly look the best. It's not the most attractive thing in the world. We can definitely improve this by doing a little bit of formatting and tidying it up a little bit. Because what we're going to aim for is I want it to go from this, what we have on the screen, to something that looks like that. So this looks a lot better. It's also interactive. I can click on these little filters at the top here and the data changes depending on what I've selected. So this is a much more attractive looking chart than the one that we get when we first add it onto our spreadsheets. So lots of little tricks that we're going to use in order to recreate what we've just seen. Now, when you're looking at a chart or thinking about formatting a chart like this, the first thing you really need to think about is what data is absolutely necessary for people to know. People just want to be able to look at the chart and immediately be able to understand and interpret what it's displaying. So you want to try and make your chart as clean as possible. You want to remove from it anything that's not necessary to convey the message. So if I'm looking at this particular chart, the first thing that stands out to me is the legend. The legend, it just says total. I don't need it because I can already see the totals depicted in the chart. So this would be the first thing that I would get rid of. Now remember, with these different chart elements, they are just text boxes, so you can simply select them and press the delete key. Alternatively, you click the plus, go to legend, and you can just deselect legend to remove that from the chart. So that is the first thing that I would get rid of. The next thing I would probably remove from this chart are these grey buttons that you can see just here. Now, this one at the bottom acts as like a little filter. So if I wanted to filter specifically for different markets, I could use that. But in general, if I'm going to apply a filter to a chart, I'm probably more likely to filter on the pivot table as opposed to the actual chart. So I'm going to remove all of the grey buttons on here, again, to make this chart look a little bit cleaner. So we can right click and we can select hide all field buttons on chart, which is just simply going to get rid of those. So we're looking a little bit less cluttered now. What else do we want to do to this chart? Well, one thing I might want to do is I can see here, if I select all of the columns, these are representing the different markets. They're quite thin columns at the moment. Maybe I want these to be a bit chunkier, particularly if I'm going to add data labels where I have the actual value displayed within the bar. At the moment, this bar isn't wide enough to accommodate any of these sales values, so I'm going to make these a little bit wider. Now, when you're doing things like this, you have lots of chart formatting options. You have chart formatting options available on the ribbons. Notice we now have a pivot chart analyze ribbon, a design ribbon, and a format ribbon at the top. So loads of options for formatting our chart. We can also find additional options in the right-click menu. So I can right-click on any part of the chart and I get more options in here. And these are very contextual. So what you see in this right-click menu really depends on what part of the chart you're clicked on. So currently I'm clicked on the columns. If I was to click down here in the data labels and right-click, I get a different set of results. Okay, so you have formatting options in the right-click menu. And of course, you have your formatting pane as well. And we can bring that up by selecting whatever it is that we want to format, in this case, the columns, and pressing Control 1 to open Format Data Series on the right-hand side. So when we open Format Data Series, check out what we have here underneath Series Options. We have an option to adjust the gap width. Now, this is going to adjust the gap in between each of these bars. So effectively, I can make these skinnier, like so, or I can drag it down and I can make these bars a little bit fatter. So I like them quite chubby. Let's take them out like that. And again, as I said, if you're thinking of putting your actual data labels inside these bars, you want to make sure that they're wide enough to accommodate whatever values you have. So I think I'm going to leave mine like that. So now that we've done that, I'm going to go in and I'm going to add some data labels. Now, we can right click and we can add data labels, and it's just going to add the actual values from the pivot tables on top of the bar. Now, the good thing about doing this is that once we add data labels in this way, it kind of means that we can get rid of this vertical axis running down the left-hand side. Because we have the values displayed on the chart, we don't really need this there. It's just another thing that's kind of unnecessary, taking up space. We can get rid of it. So let's press delete just to get rid of that. And now we just have our data labels. Now we can format these as well. So if we click on one data label, it's going to select them all. You can press Control 1 again to open your Format Data Labels pane on the right-hand side. And there's lots of things we can do in here. One of the more interesting things that we can do, if we go to Label Options, this is where we can specify what we're showing in our labels. So you don't necessarily have to show the value from our pivot table. We could show other things. Now, I have a very small data set, but if I was to choose, let's say, series name, for example, that's just going to say total. If I choose category name, it's actually going to put the market as well as the actual value. So sometimes that can be really useful depending on the data that you're displaying. Now, for me in this chart, that is overkill. I just want the value in there. And if we scroll down, we can change the label position. So currently I have these showing on the outside end of my bars, but I could choose to show them on the inside end. That can be quite a nice effect. And that's what I mean by having your bar wide enough to accommodate the actual value. We could put them inside the base. There's sometimes a bit of a problem with this because if you don't have a bar that's tall enough, it can look a little bit strange. Or you can put them on the outside end. That's always a reasonably safe option to put them just there. Now, something else that we can do here is maybe I decide that for these particular data labels, I don't necessarily need the currency formatting applied in here. I have it in the table, which is why it's been pulled through to the chart, but I could remove that by expanding number down here, and we can choose a different category of formatting. So if I format these as a number as opposed to a counting format, I can then take the decimal places down to 0 and I get a slightly cleaner looking number. So again, if space is a concern for you, you can do things like that, and it's not actually going to change it in the pivot table, it's just going to change it on the chart. Okay, so quite nice and useful. Now, another thing that you'll notice is that when you're putting together a pivot chart based off of pivot table data, notice that my pivot table data is organized alphabetically. So it's running from A to Z. So markets start with Africa, APAC, Canada, so on and so forth. And that's fine. It's displaying it in the chart in the same way, but it might be that you want to sort this. Instead of having it running A to Z, maybe you want it to run from largest to smallest, something like that. So this is where you would go to your pivot table. You can right click and you can sort largest to smallest, and it's going to change the way that that's ordered in your pivot chart as well. Okay, so don't forget about that. Sometimes it's a bit easier to read if you sort it in that way. So we're looking pretty good. It looks a lot cleaner to when we first started. There's still some other changes that we need to make. So let's start to talk about color. Now, when you create a chart, the default color that you see here is going to be based on whatever theme you have active in your Excel spreadsheet. So for most people, that might be the standard office theme. If we go to page layout, this is where you can see what themes you have applied. Now, this is kind of the standard office theme, which most people have by default. I've actually changed mine. I have my own custom theme. So that's what I'm using, but your colors might be slightly different. So if you want to change the colors of these bars, you can do it very simply. You can change the theme simply by selecting a different one from the gallery. Notice that it's also changing the font. Because these are themes, themes contain colors, they contain fonts, and they contain effects. So you can use these. Alternatively, you can just click on the bars and go to the Format tab and use Shape Fill, and you can change them to whatever color you like. Okay. Now, a little trick here. It might be that you want to use a color in your chart that maybe is not part of the standard palette. It's not part of your theme colors. Maybe you have a very specific hex code that you need to use in your chart. If you work at a company, a lot of companies have branded colors that they like you to use across your documents, across your presentations, and across your spreadsheets. So you might have a very specific hexadecimal value, which relates to a color for your company's branded colors. Now I'm going to show you a little trick because I discovered this recently. I think it's been around in Windows for years, but I literally just found it the other day and I was like, oh, that's really cool. So I'm going to show you it now because this can be really useful. Because I don't know if you know, but if you are a PowerPoint user, you might be aware of the eyedropper utility. What the eyedropper utility allows us to do is basically use it to pick up a color anywhere in the PowerPoint slide and use it elsewhere. So that's brilliant if you're trying to match colors or you're trying to use branded colors. Maybe you're trying to match a color from a specific logo. You can literally click on it and transfer it to something else on the screen. Now, unfortunately, in Excel, if I was trying to do that, if I click on these bars and go to the Format tab, and Shape Fill, this is where you would find the eyedropper utility in PowerPoint in this little section down here. But notice we don't have one in Excel. So recently I discovered there is a way by utilizing a little Windows feature that can allow you to do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to show you this example because I think this is really helpful. Now, before we do this, I'm just going to insert a little logo that I downloaded. And this logo is not related at all to the data that we're using. But I just wanted, it was very colorful. So I thought it would be quite a good one to use. If I can remember where I put it, I think it was in downloads. There we go. So let's just say this is our company logo and it's over here. And I want to color the bars in my chart to match one of the colors in this logo. So everything looks cohesive and matches together. So this is where we can use a little feature in Windows called Power Toys to do this. Now, if you've never heard of Power Toys, it is something you have to install onto your PC. Now, I've got it loaded over here. Here it is. If you just Google Power Toys Microsoft, the first link that comes up is going to take you through to this website, and it's simply a case of clicking Install Power Toys. It's an official Windows thing, so you're not downloading anything nasty, and it's really cool. It allows you to do lots and lots of different things. It sort of extends the capabilities of your applications and of Windows, and one of the things you can do with it is you can utilize an eyedropper utility, which we can then use in Excel. So to bring up Power Toys, we need to press Alt Space. You can just search for Power Toys once you've installed it. and it will bring it up. It's this one just here. Now, as I said, there are lots of things you can do with Power Toys, lots of things. We're not going to get into any of these, but one of them is the color picker. Now, notice here the activation shortcut for color picker, Windows key Shift C. So if I know this shortcut, I don't even need to pull this up. I can just, in my Excel spreadsheet, press Windows Shift C, and it turns my cursor into a color picker. Take a look at that. And as I hover over colors in this logo, it's telling me what the hexadecimal value is. So if I have something very specific that I want to use, so maybe this orange color, I can just click. There's the hexadecimal value. I can then copy it to the clipboard, and I can then use it to color my chart bars. So I can then click on my chart bars, go to Format, Shape Fill, More Fill Colors, and this is where we can paste in that hexadecimal value. Okay, really cool. And you can see the last colors that you recently used are kept here as well. So that's a really nice little trick, because picking up branded colors can be a bit of a pain, particularly if you need to use a specific color in your chart. So that might be new for you. It might not. As I said, somebody told me the other day, it's been around for 20 years. I only found out about it the other day, so I thought it'd be a good time to show you. So that's pretty good. Now, something else we can do here when it comes to selecting different elements in your chart. For example, maybe I want to remove the grid lines. I can click on the grid lines. Sometimes it's quite hard to select specifically what you want. Now, what can help you to do this is if you jump up to the, I think it's the, where are we? The Format tab just here. In the current selection group, this allows us to select specific areas of the chart. So if I want to delete those grid lines, instead of fiddling around with my cursor trying to select them, I can just choose grid lines. It's going to select them all, press the delete key to get rid of them. Okay, so this little drop down is good for selecting different parts of your chart. A couple of other things I might want to do here. I'm going to add a quick title to my chart. So this is a simple case of just typing in the the text box. So let's say total sales by market. You could add another text box if you want to have a subtitle under here. I'm not going to do that because I feel like we're running out of time a little bit here. We're just going to add the one title. But one thing we are going to do is we're going to add a slicer to our chart. And again, slicers are brilliant things to add to your chart. If you're not sure what they are, if we take a look at this one, this is the slicer. It's a filter which we can use if we want to see all of the markets where we're just looking at furniture sales for all of the different markets, or just looking at office supplies for all of the different markets. So it's a visual filter which is useful for people, and it's easy for people to understand. Now, a couple of tricks when it comes to inserting slicers and formatting them. If we click on our chart, go up to Pivot Chart Analyze, in the filter group, we can choose Insert Slicer. And what you're going to see here is a big long list of all of the fields from your original data set. So we can insert a slicer for any of these fields that we have in our data set. So I'm going to choose category. We're just going to have the one slicer. You can have as many as you like to insert that. Now, when you insert a slicer, they have a very sort of generic standard look and feel to them. And if I was just to leave this as it is, I mean, it works. It's going to work on my data. It's going to filter, but it doesn't really look cohesive. It doesn't look like it's part of this chart at all. And again, we want to try and make everything look really engaging and like it's meant to be there. So what we can do here is apply some formatting to make this look a little bit better. Now notice when I'm clicked on the slicer, we have a slicer contextual ribbon. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is, instead of displaying these categories running vertically, I want to display them horizontally. Now we can change that by using, in this buttons group, where we have columns, currently it says one column. I can take this up to 3 columns, which will effectively allow me to display these categories running horizontally. I'm just going to expand them out, and let's move that up to resize it. So immediately that's looking a little bit neater. Another thing I might want to do is maybe remove this header information just here. So where we have category and then these buttons, maybe I don't want to display that. We can right click, we can go into our slicer settings. And notice here underneath header, currently display header is ticked. We can deselect it, click on OK, and it gets rid of that header. So we now have a much cleaner looking slicer. The last thing I would probably do here is I would create a custom style for my slicer so that it matches everything that I have in my chart. Now, when it comes to changing the colors of your slicer, we have a gallery of slicer styles. We have some dark styles and we have some light styles. And again, what you see in here are very much based on your theme colors. Now, I change my bars to match the color picked out of the logo. So none of these slicer styles are really going to work well. None of them are very similar to this orange color. So what I would probably do here is create a new slicer style, a custom slicer style, and use this orange color in the slicer. Now, it's very simple to create a slicer style. You just need to select the one that you're currently using. So you can see the slicer style that's currently in use because it has a border around the outside. So it's this one. Right click and you need to duplicate the style. You can then give your new slicer style a name. So I always call them my initials. Slicer. I've done a few of these, so I'm going to name this slicer 3. And then you can go through and customize each part of that particular slicer. So one of the first things I'd probably want to do here is I don't really want that border around the outside of the slicer. So if I go to whole slicer and format, I can then remove the border or set the border to none to get rid of that border around the outside. If I wanted to change the colors, I could then go into any of these and make them this orange color. Now, there's lots of different items related to these because you can have a different color if the item's selected and has data. You can have a different color if you just hover over it, a different color if it's unselected. So there's lots of different things you can change in here, but it's basically the same principle. You select what you want to change, you go into format. If you want to change the background fill color, you could do that. You can go to more colors, you can add your hexadecimal value, you can change the font color, you can do whatever you like. Now, just to save a bit of time, I've already got a slicer style or a custom slicer style, which I set up earlier. I basically just went through this process and changed things to the orange color. So if I cancel out of here, once you've created your slicer style, you're going to see it up here in the custom area. And you can simply select it and then you'll have your new slicer style applied and it looks a lot more cohesive with the rest of this chart. If I click away, you can also see that we have no border around the outside. So when I remove the grid lines from Excel, you can see it looks like it's supposed to be part of this chart. I also might want to remove the border around the outside here. So I'm going to select the chart, go to Format, Shape Outline, and we're going to say no outline. And then you can move the slicer so it's a bit closer to it. And we have a really nice looking cohesive chart. Okay, so a few different tips and tricks just there. How are we doing for time? About 10 past, not too bad. Let's move on to our next chart. Now, I spoke quite a bit about line charts. If I just go to the second line chart that we have here, this is a reasonably interesting chart. Again, we're using a slicer, but a different type of slicer. This is a timeline slicer that we have at the top. And then what I've done here is I've combined two chart types together to get this kind of look and feel. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to recreate this so you can see a few other techniques. So let's go back to our data set. So this time I'm displaying time-based data because, as we know, when we're using a line chart, it works best for data that changes over time. So I have some months of the year and I have the sum of sales. So let's go in, let's insert a chart. And this time we're going to insert just a line chart. I'm going to do a lot of the same formatting. Again, I don't really need the total. That's kind of irrelevant in this case. So I'm going to delete that. And I'm also going to hide all the field buttons on the chart. Now, let's take a look at the data. So if you notice, the chart doesn't have all of the months. We have some gaps. So we have January, February, March, April, and then we skip over May. So there's obviously no data for May, June, July, August, September, but then we don't have October, November, and December. Because my chart is just going to show where we have data. So if I didn't have any sales in May, it's just not going to show it. Now, it might be that you're happy with it like that, but a much better way is to include all of the months, but just have it at 0 where there were no sales. So how can we change this to include any of these months? Well, what we can do is if we right click and go into, I think we go into value field, sorry, not value field settings. Right click on the date and go into field settings. And we're going to go to layout and print. And we want to select this option here, show items with no data. When I click on this, it's going to show the items that don't have any data. And these little weird dates just here, don't worry about those. That's because I deleted a whole heap of data from the data set first of all. So I'm just going to remove those. Just pretend they're not there. But notice that we now have all of the dates or all of the months showing in the chart, but there's just no data. Now, this looks a bit weird because we have a broken line chart. I don't really want it to look like that, but I do want it to include all of the months. Now, it doesn't matter because what we can do is we just need to add a 0 in for all of these months to get that line to run correctly. So again, a quick way of doing this is if we right click, we can go into pivot table options, and we can say in this format group for empty cells show, instead of nothing, we want to show a 0. And that's basically going to join that line back up, but it's not going to be a broken line. It just goes down to 0 when there haven't been any sales. All right, so just think about that when you're working through your chart as well. A couple of other little things. Let's take a look at this little vertical axis just here. Now, this looks pretty good. Now, sometimes if you have an axis like this and it's displaying values, it might be that your values are very, very long. If this was millions of sales, so if we had very, very large numbers here is what I'm trying to say, this can start to look a bit strange because your axis just has a very, very large number in here. So this might be where you want to start thinking about using custom formatting just to shorten the values that you're seeing. For example, I can see here, I've got, these are in thousands. We've got 2,000, 4,000, 6,000. Maybe instead of this longer number, I just want it to say 2K, 4K, 6K, 8K, things like that. I can do that using custom formatting. So if we click in the vertical axes, Control 1 to pull up format axes, and go all the way down to the bottom where we have number, this is where we can start to change the formatting. So if we go to custom, notice here underneath type, this is what you want to type in to format these numbers with K after them. Okay, so I already typed the code in. Once you've applied one code to your data, it will be available for you to select from this drop down. So I did this earlier, so it's selected just here. You would type it into here and click add to get it to appear in the menu above. So this is the format that you need if you want to change that to 2K, 4K, so on and so forth. All right, so think about using custom formatting to shorten the numbers that you're using in your chart. Another thing you might want to do here is you might want to reorder the way that your chart's displaying these months. So currently my chart is showing the data from January to December. But what if I'm an accountant and I want to see this data based off of the financial year? So maybe I want to have the chart starting at April and going all the way through to March. A quick way of reordering everything is if you go to the pivot table, if I want to move April up to the top, I can simply select it, click, and just drag it up to the top, and it's going to rearrange it. So I could select multiple. So April, I want to move all of these. I can drag them, up, And I now have my chart based off of the financial year as opposed to the actual calendar year. So again, another little trick, you can drag and drop to move things around. What else can we do with our line charts? Let's do some fun formatting. Let's select the line. Again, Control-1 to open up Format Data Series. A couple of little cool things that we can do in here. If we jump across to Marker and expand Fill, this is where we can change the fill color of the specific markers on the line. But one little option that I quite like, because this is quite a fun little option, is this one just here, Vary Colors by Point. If you want to quickly add some color to your chart, if you click that, it's basically going to make each change in point a different color. So again, makes it look a little bit more interesting. So maybe think about doing something along those lines. Again, if we select the line and go back to Marker, if we don't want that, we can just choose a solid fill color. So maybe instead of Vary Colors by Point, I want, let's go for a pink line. Sorry, I meant to change the marker. Let's go to the markers option at the top, and I'm going to go to built-in, and I'm going to choose one of these markers. So underneath built-in, instead of just having a round marker, you can choose any of these symbols. And if you choose one of these built-in marker options, if I go for this one, you can then choose the size as well. So I could have this really large if I wanted to, or I could take this down, but I can make them more prominent so they stand out. Now I've filled the marker color with this pink. We also have a border around the outside. I'm just going to do that in the same pink. And then if I want to change the color of the line, of course I can click on the line, go to the line section, and we can change the solid line color to whatever we like just here. So have I just selected one again? I'm not very good at selecting, as you can probably tell. Let's change it to solid line, and I want all of them to be pink along those lines. So you can really sort of start to change things, jazz it up, make it look less boring. Another really interesting option, and something that I'm seeing fairly frequently, is instead of having an angled line, I've seen people using a smooth line quite a bit. So if you click on the line and scroll all the way down to the bottom, notice we have smooth line just here. If I click this, instead of an angled line, we kind of get that curvy line instead. Okay. And just quickly, because we're running out of time and I haven't showed you a lot of the things that I want to show you, but just very quickly, if you wanted to get sort of a different effect where you have your line, but then you have the area underneath the line chart is shaded, you can combine this with an area chart. Now, in order to do this, you can't really have a smooth line. So I'm just going to deselect smooth line, because what we would need to do here is add another series into our chart. So what I'm going to do is we're going to click in the pivot table. We're going to open up the field list, and I'm just going to add another sales field into the values area. So this is basically exactly the same as the other one. Let's format it so that it looks the same. And I think I just had number formatting for this with 0 decimal places. So now what we can do is we can bring this series into the chart. So I can right click. Hang on, do I want to do that? Just bear with me 1 second. I thought that was going to bring it into the chart automatically, but it hasn't. Just bear with me. I was expecting that to automatically add, but it didn't. I'm going to come back to that at the end because I want to make sure that we get some of the content. What we're basically going to do is just create another series and change it to an area chart, but it's not doing what it did earlier. Maybe I've done something a little bit wrong there. We'll come back to that at the end. Let's move on to our next chart because we've only got about 10 minutes left. This one is a stacked column chart, and this is a really cool little technique if you want to add formulas into your charts and also add a target line as well. Now, here we have a slightly different setup. So I've got some companies A to E. I have some sales figures for those companies, and we have a sales target up here. So basically what I want to do is I want this kind of effect. So what we have is a target line. So whenever the sales target changes, if I change this to 18,000 up here, the target line moves, and notice that those bars are conditionally formatted so that if they fall below the sales target, they show in green. If they fall above, they show in pink. And this is actually a really easy effect to achieve. We just need a couple of formulas and to add a few things into the chart. So let's go back to here and see how we set this up. Now, anything that you want to include in a chart, you need to make sure that you kind of add it into your table over here. So what I need is I need to have a heading that says target met. I'm going to have another one that says target not met. And I'm also going to pull the sales target into this little table as well. Let's format these. Let's make them gray and just resize these columns. Now this is going to seem a little bit weird, but even though I don't have any data in here yet, I'm going to create the chart first of all. So I'm going to press Control A to select everything. Let's go up to Insert, and this time we're just going to create a regular chart. It's not a pivot chart or anything like that. We're going to add just a clustered column, a stacked column chart. So what we have here is the only data series that we have showing are the actual sales, because that's all we have in our table at the moment. But notice in the legend, we have a key for target met, target not met, and sales target, but we don't have any data for that as yet. So as we add data, because this is a stacked column chart, you're going to see this data pile up on top of each of the columns. Now, what we want to do here is we want to use formulas in this particular chart. So we're going to use an if formula to find out if the sales value has met the target or not. So let's type in equals if a logical test. So if the sales value is greater than or equal to our sales target, and we're going to press F4 to lock because we want to copy this down. If that's true, we want to output the sales value. If it's false, I want a blank cell. So now when I close this off and copy it down, what we should find is that whenever the sales value has met or exceeded the sales target, we have the value in the cell. Whenever it hasn't, we have a blank. And I'm just going to apply comma formatting to make everything look the same. So we're going to do a similar thing over here. We're going to say if, and we're going to do another logical test, but this time we're going to test if it's under the sales target. So if the value is less than the sales target, F4 to make it absolute because we're going to copy down. If that's true, we want to output the value into the cell. If it's false, we want a blank. Close the bracket, hit enter. And this time when we copy it down, we should find we have those other values showing. So let's add some formatting. And notice as I'm doing this, it's stacking that information onto the chart. The final thing I want to add into here is the actual sales target. So all I'm going to do is link to the sales target cell. Let's press F4 and copy this down. Now you might be thinking, what on earth are you doing? We're going to make some changes now to make this chart look a little bit better. So I don't want my chart to display like this, but I have all the information that I need. So I need to make some changes as to how we're representing these different values. Now, the first thing here is these sales values, which is represented by the green part of this column, we don't really need those because we have those in these two columns just here. Our formulas are generating these values. So if I click on the chart, you can see here it's showing me the columns that are in use in the chart. We can grab the bottom handle and we can drag in to exclude those sales figures, and it's going to use the target met and the target not met values instead. The next thing we want to do is we want to change the sales target. We don't want that showing as part of the column. We want that to show as a line. So this is where we can right click and we can change the chart type. Click on the bars and change series chart type. At the bottom here, this is where we can define what type of chart we're using for each of our data series. So I want all of these to show as a column, but I don't want sales target to show as a stacked column chart. I want it to show as a line chart instead. And notice as soon as I change that, we get the effect that we're looking for. Click on OK, and we now have a target line, which hopefully will move when we change the sales target value in cell C2, which it does. Notice that those bars change color as soon as I start adding values in. Okay, so a really cool little effect. We can then go in and of course we can start formatting the line however we want. We can change the color, we can add arrows on the end, we can do whatever we like with this particular line. And that's all I've done over here is I've pretty much removed the grid lines, I've moved the legend up to the top, and I've just added some arrows on either side of that target line. So that can be a really nice little effect and a really cool way to make your charts a little bit more dynamic. Final few minutes because it's 25 past. I knew we would struggle. I just want to talk to you briefly about map charts because map charts can look really cool. I always see them used in dashboards. And as you would imagine, the best type of data to use a map chart on is geographical data. Now, I want to show you a little problem that does occur with map charts. And the data set that we're going to use is, we've got some states listed just here, and I'm actually just going to delete out that bottom one. I've got some states listed here, and these are states in Australia, okay? And we'll just say that this is for a store and how much revenue they've generated by each state. So if I wanted to depict this in a map chart, I could click in the data, jump up to insert. In maps, I could go for filled map. Now, these can be a little bit slow to load, but when they do, this isn't going to display as I want it to display. And again, you might need to wait a couple of seconds for it to actually load up. There we go. The data that I've selected is just for Australia, but it's showing me the entire world. Now, why is it showing me a world map instead of just Australia? Well, it's because in my little table where I have the state WA, can you see, if you zoom in on America, you can see that I think it's Washington State, that would make sense, is showing in a light green color. It's very hard to see, but that's because the map chart thinks that where I have WA in the pivot table, I'm talking about Washington State as opposed to Western Australia. So it's showing me the whole map because it thinks I've included data or US-based data as well as Australian data. So a way to get around this is you need to make sure you add the country in as well as the state. So if you're listing out states of America or states of India or provinces of Canada or counties of the UK, make sure that you add the country as well. So if I delete this out, as soon as I add another column, Control-Shift+ is the shortcut key to add a brand new column. I'm going to type in country. Let's just make that bold. And if we add in Australia, a quick way to copy this down is just to select all of the cells, Control-D to copy down. And now if I do the same thing and insert a filled map chart, it's just going to zoom in on Australia. Okay, I'm not going to get that whole map because it knows I'm talking about Australia and not the US. So just bear that in mind when you're creating map charts. Another thing I would always advise you do is that you put your data into a table, because notice that currently this state just here, which is Queensland, is in grey, and I haven't included that in my data set. If I was to add this onto the bottom, so if I put Australia, QLD and 20,000, it doesn't update. I would need to put this data into a table, Control-T, because then when I add a new line on the bottom, it is then going to update in the map chart. Okay, so put your data in a table. Now, the final point before I let you go about these field map charts, you cannot create a field map chart based on pivot table data. Let me show you what I mean. Let's pretend that this is a pivot table as opposed to just an Excel table. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to convert this. I'm just going to summarize with pivot table. Let's put it on an existing worksheet. Let's put it down here. We're going to add country to the rows, state, and revenue, basically trying to get it to look like the table above. And we're going to change the report layout to tabular form. Now, what I would need to do is I'm going to need to remove the grand totals and the subtotals, and I want to have Australia copied all the way down. So we can do this by right-clicking and going into pivot table options, and we can say, where are we? I can never remember. Oh, sorry, no, it's under report layout, repeat all item labels. So this is a pivot table. But if I try and create a map chart based off of pivot table data, so if we go to pivot table analyze and pivot chart, and we have map in here, notice we get an error. It says you can't create this chart type with data inside a pivot table. So if you're trying to do this, what you need to do is basically take the data out of the table first of all. So if you've got pivot table data, you want to Control C to copy it, and then you want to just paste it as plain text. So basically, so it looks like this up here, okay? Then create your map chart based off of that new data, and you can always right-click and choose Select Data, and then point it back to the pivot table afterwards. Okay, so the point being here is you cannot create a map chart based off of pivot table data. It needs to be just table data, or you can copy and paste and then redirect back to the pivot table afterwards. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you all enjoyed that. I hope you all learn at least one thing that you think is going to help you. Have a great night, a great afternoon, a great morning, wherever you are, and I will see you next time. Bye, guys.
If you're not a subscriber, click down below to subscribe so you get notified about similar videos we upload. To get the files the instructor used in this tutorial and follow along, click over there. And click over there to watch more videos on YouTube from Simon Sez IT.